Hello, my fellow Westorians. Welcome back to History of Westeros podcast. We had a Sunday off, but now we're back. We're here to talk about R'hllor. R'hllor, that hard to say, but fun to burn name. Sean, do you have an appropriately red beverage today, or did you
Not
fail to color
particularly.
code?
Yeah, I did. I really failed. I should have got Rainbow Machine naked drink, but I have the naked berry protein drink. That's what I have, and the pomegranate blueberry V8.
Whoa,
along
V8
with
getting in
a
there.
yes, along with a new Mountain Dew, pineapple Mountain Dew in the mix.
I
In
don't
the
even
mix,
drink.
quite literally.
I don't even really drink soda these days, but I'm kind of intrigued by a pineapple Mountain Dew just to try.
They also have a mango, which I will
Less
use
intrigued
next week.
by, but also
Mango
interest.
Dew. Interesting. Huh.
You know, I was thinking, since R'hllor is such kind of a small, short topic, maybe we'll fit in. We'll also do like the Stark family or something.
We could sneak that in there, yeah.
Yeah, some other small topic. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll also cover War and Peace today. And the entire catalog of Star Wars animated shows. We'll cover all of that, yeah, today. As part of our coverage of R'hllor. All 50 seasons of Guiding Light. You know, we'll just pile more on there. There really are over 50 seasons of that show, aren't there?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, yeah, hello, everybody. It's great to be back after our short little break there. Shout out to our good friend Nina. Her latest post on Good Queen Alley with 1l.tumblr.com is a cool idea on what if Aegon IV was trying to make Daemon Blackfyre king of the Stepstones? What was that? What if that was his original plan before just going straight up and calling him heir or giving him the sword Blackfyre? The reason this idea works pretty well for me in particular, as well as just being a good, fun theory on top of that, is that there was a lot of politicking with Tyrosh and with Dorne. Dorne wasn't in the realm at that point still, so it was just before. So there was a lot of... the political situation was very different. There's a lot of different movers and shakers in the game at that point. And we know Aegon was trying to undermine his own heir, and appointing his bastard son to King of the Stepstones would be, or maneuvering that, he couldn't just appoint him, would be a good way to take a shot at weakening his heir even more. But, you know, it is speculation, but I enjoy it. Very good stuff. So check out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com and have some fun. We, of course, are always happy to get questions from you all, whether you submit them to our email at westeroshistory.gmail.com or whether you join our Discord or Facebook groups. Those are probably the three best places. You can also send questions via Twitter, and anywhere you can find us, we'll probably take a question. And today's trivia. We'll be asking a lot of our own questions, actually, because there's a lot of unanswered things about R'hllor. And even when we can't answer something, we still want to raise the question. It's fun to think about, even things that we have a lot of vagueness around. But we'll start today with our own question, our trivia question, which is on topic today. Several people refer to or think of Thoros jokingly as a pink priest, or just as pink, including the Ghost of High Heart, Arya, and even Thoros himself uses the term pink for himself. The phrase pink priest is used by one other POV character, and it's not in reference to Thoros, who says the phrase pink priest other than those other three characters.
I don't know, but it sounds like Sean is muted, but also that Sean needs to perhaps cosplay as Thoros the Pink Priest.
Oh,
That'd be pretty good. Yeah, you could pull that one off based on his.
I know the answer to this question. I'm just proud of myself.
Nice. All right, we'll see if anybody else has it at the end of the episode. So R'hllor, to start, R'hllor is a fire god, not just a fire god, but that's where we'll start. And that's an interesting place to begin, because we've seen a lot of like elemental gods, right? That's how a lot of things start. A lot of these gods, like wind gods and sun gods and water gods and forest gods, a lot of those have kind of faded as humanity advanced and civilization rose and more nations formed and chiefs turned into kings and things like that. The conceptualization of what gods are gets maybe a little more sophisticated. It's not just what we see in nature. But I like to kind of guess, and tell me what you think of this, Sean, that there were probably a lot of other fire gods back in the day, like there are or were in our real world. But sometimes when two religions are similar, one of them kind of swallows up the other one. Like there's a ton of versions of Christianity. They haven't all been swallowed. You know, a lot of them exist independently, but there have been some that have been swallowed up.
Christianity swallowed some other religions too,
Sure.
depending quite how you define swallow. But
Yeah.
it definitely makes a lot of sense. The early religions, one significant role, one of the main roles religion plays is to explain the world around us, right? Like one thing it does is like, how should we behave? That's like one role religion has, sort of a philosophical element. But another one is scientific element, like why did the thunder strike? When is it going to rain? Or the gods must be angry. Yeah, things like that. And so a lot of early religions were based around that. And, I don't know how much of it is just, I don't know if coincidence is right, where maybe it's sort of a natural inevitability as we understand those things better when we start to be able to predict the stars and the weather, which we're way better at now. But even 1,000 years ago, they were better than 10,000 years ago, And so we started to have gods be centered more around philosophy, and monotheistic gods started to outweigh pantheons of gods. Those were things that tended to happen in a lot of cultures in a lot of areas. It kind of makes sense. You can see the reasons for that.
And with R'hllor, though, I guess something worked a little better. It succeeded because it was successful at subsuming other fire gods. It's kind of fitting, right? Fire gods. You see a lot of times that is like a hungry god or greedy thing, because fire just keeps going. It never burns out until it runs out of stuff to burn. It doesn't just pause and say, hey, I've had enough. So R'hllor has many titles and nicknames. The Lord of Light, the Red God. But R'hllor is also the god of shadow. That's where there's a pretty substantial difference in this characterization. Just fire, we've seen lots of examples of that in the real world, other fantasy stories, other places, even sci-fi, I'm sure. But fire and shadow combined is a little different. That's a little more ominous, isn't it? Even though Melisandre says it's a good thing. But she says this even as she's pointing out that R'hllor likes pretty things to be sacrificed. It's like we like to burn pretty things and nice things. The better, the nicer the thing, the more pleasing it is to R'hllor. Like that sounds like hungry, greedy. Give me all that. But somehow Melisandre makes that sound good. It doesn't really work on me though. I don't know about you. She doesn't really make it sound good to me. She does make the others sound dangerous though. Of course, she doesn't need help with that. I mean, they're kind of dangerous on their own.
You could see a lot of, I can't help sometimes but be a little cynical about religion. So I'll try to keep that in check. But a lot of religion, a lot of their beliefs, whether they were sinister in the first place or not, the way they play out is, it's almost like evolution. If there's something in your religion that causes people to believe in it more strongly or incorporates more people, then the religion is more likely to survive, right? Mm-hmm. And so if your religion demands some sort of sacrifice, once you make that sacrifice, you're a little more committed. You know what I mean? You're a little less likely to opt out after you've made some big sacrifice. So a religion requiring some big sacrifice, especially if you can get someone when they're more naive or young or whatever, you're more likely to have them for life, Yeah. So I could see that element, R'hllor, demanding something more pretty. It's a test of loyalty, and it creates a greater commitment in the long run.
So that's a really good way to say it. Now, R'hllor does play a huge role in the story, and as Sean was joking earlier, it's not a topic that we can fully cover in one episode, but we have covered some things elsewhere. We covered a lot in our Ashai episode. There's a lot of stuff about shadow binding and some of the Red Priests and the history there, and the prophecies. That's a big thing. We're not going to get too deep with the prophecy because that's, other than to acknowledge it and tie in certain aspects of it. But the actual prophecy itself we've dealt with elsewhere. But this is just a quick list of some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Red priests and red temples, a variety of fire and shadow magics, visions, resurrection, glamours, shadow babies. Not like a deep dive on what those are, but comparing them to the thematic opposition. Because one of the main focuses today is comparing R'hllor, comparing fire themes to the ice themes of winter that are coming to a head in the next book. and are starting to come to a head at the end of Dance with Dragons. The dragons alone are not the fire element. They are a big part of it. Perhaps they're the tip of the spear, the most important part, other than perhaps Daenerys. But they are not alone, right? They're the fire stuff is a lot broader than just dragons and Targaryens. And R'hllor is like, I don't know, if Dany is the queen of all that, then the R'hllorists are like the infantry, the foot soldiers. I mean, yeah, she's already got Unsullied, but these guys are still the rank and file, boots on the ground types. You could say it's a notable melody in the Song of Ice and Fire, like the fire themes. There's a bunch of different instruments playing the fire part, and this is one of them. We'll also have some comparisons to other religions. We've got a little chunk on real-world stuff today. Plot threads around a number of characters, large and small. Of course, Azor Ahai, Nissa Nissa, Lightbringer, that stuff will be in here a bit. And we'll get at what it's like for in-world characters, because one thing that's really neat, I think, is that R'hllorism isn't big in Westeros, but it's starting to become bigger. We're seeing the rise of it, and it's neat because it's a really old religion, but it's new to Westeros. And those two things together are going to cause some interesting stories. Will have already caused some interesting stories, or parts of stories, and they're going to continue to do that. Let's get into the first mentions, as we so often do. We'll start there. The Clash of Kings prologue. Here we go, the first mention of R'hllor.
Melisandre of Vashai, sorceress, shadowbinder, and priestess to R'hllor, the Lord of Light, the Heart of Fire, the God of Flame and Shadow. Melisandre, whose madness must not be allowed to spread beyond Dragonstone.
Sorry, Crescent, that is whose thoughts there are there. It spreads quite a bit beyond Dragonstone. And the fact that you're unable to poison her successfully, even though she drinks the poison, is, that certainly set up her character a little more. Like, whoa, what's up with that? But yeah, some examples. I mean, these are familiar, but just to remind everybody, the Queen's Men of Stannis and Selyse, of course. The Brotherhood Without Banners, which is kind of unusual. You have an outlaw band in the middle of the Riverlands. It's adopted this new god. That's certainly the circumstances for that are not unusual in a sense that it's weird, but it is, from a distance, it's kind of odd. And of course, it's huge outside of Westeros. It has been for so long time. I skipped one. The forced conversion of free folk. A lot of free folk have been converted. I don't know how sincere they are. Probably not very, but some of them maybe will be pretty sincere. I think the bulk of them, are now we're still. I know what we said. We burned a piece of werewood and said the words, but that doesn't change what's in my heart.
Yeah, I'm like, I wonder how many of them are kind of in line with like a Victorian kind of perspective, where he's like, well, they might all be real, so I can't. Like, I said the words, so like I have
add them to the list.
Yeah, add them to the list. Like I still believe in my old gods, but I won't not believe in R'hllor either.
Yeah, it's like they disagree on the part where Melisandre says it's the only god. Like all the other gods are demons. They're like, well, we don't agree with that part.
Yeah.
Well, like that's basically what Victorian says. He's like, no, I don't. No, I was like, no, the drowned god's not a demon. Watch your tongue. But the red god, he deserves his due. That's kind of where they like compromise.
I had a couple thoughts here. One along that line. It is, Melisandre does want them to accept R'hllor as just the one god.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that they might, when they see the real power, right? They might be convinced. Does that make sense? That R'hllor is real, is powerful. But I still don't know if that will convince them that R'hllor is the only. How will she convince them that all other gods are demons? That will be hard. That's
a tough sell. I agree, especially given what you said about people who have had these whatever gods they do worship have been there since they were kids, and their parents and their grandparents and all that. So
that leads me into a second thought, though. It's something I think about a lot when we contemplate where the series is going. The idea that they have adopted R'hllor now, even if it's only like they said the words, they're going through the motions. But if a new generation is brought into that also, like, will all of them teach their kids, we're just pretending, or will the kids just accept it? It's the society that they're part of, and they'll just go along with it. In a few generations, it may be a legitimate religion that takes hold, I don't know, in the North and spreads, whatever. But we can't see that. That's not right. That how is Dany's arc going to resolve, revealing the long-term effects of R'hllor in this continent? I feel like George has presented a story that we want answers from beyond the lifespans of these characters.
Yeah, like you could see, like if you see a bunch of young children like worshiping R'hllor, you can be pretty sure that's going to carry forward. That would be a sign that, like, it's not a guarantee, but it would be a pretty big, like, clue towards the future. So it has been surging, we'll say, the whether it will settle, whether it will hold. You know, and one of the things I think that will determine that, Sean, maybe it won't convince people that R'hllor is the only god, but just like Stannis was convinced by the fact that Melisandre has real power, like actual magic, he's like, okay, well, I can't deny that. I think a lot of the free folk are going to see that same thing and be like, okay, this is real. Maybe some of them already may have seen her burn Varamir out of the sky. You know, they're like, whoa, what was that? So they're already afraid of her. They already know she has real power. So it's just a matter of her doing some more, maybe enchanting them. I don't mean that literally, like with the possibilities of what else she can do. And she can do a lot, because she says the wall, that area is, a hinge of the world. We've talked about that before. And whatever she's going to do, it's going to be more powerful than things she's done before. So that's going to impress some people.
Yeah, although
one thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Well, one thing that will be important, I think, is that the power she demonstrates be beneficial to them.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
that's true.
R'hllor's a demon and our God is real.
Yeah, it has to bring them benefit. You're right.
I was going to say, I think you brought up one of the counterpoints for all that is that, they see things like Varamir, they see skin changers, so they have proof of, the old gods' power. They have proof, all of them, that their gods have power as well, which is the reason why they wouldn't just, discount it, even if they see R'hllor's power.
Yeah.
But they might not discount their gods being demons, or they may see they're all gods, but Melisandre's saying ours is the one you should worship, those others are demons. And if Varamir is their evidence, she's right.
Yeah. There's an argument to be made that the powers of the old gods are kind of evil. That doesn't mean they would not respect that, because a lot of that isn't just, I choose the god that I like the most. No, you choose, sometimes you worship what you have to. It's like, well, if we don't worship, they're going to squash us. It's that kind of thing. It isn't like a modern thing where we just go, which church do I want to go to? Like where you just kind of think you have all this freedom of choice in that regard. So you might say that in the religion, the people of Westeros, given all the issues, the war, the starvation, you might say people are a bit inflamed. So that would bring them perhaps to something new. And of course, with all this winter overrunning everything and the cold and all that, you can see why fire would be like yes, we need some more of that. That's very helpful. And you can see why that might be the reason some people survive, is because they have sufficient warmth. And Melisandre says, yes, thank R'hllor for all this warmth. Thank him for the light, the darkness that's coming when the light comes after it all. That's who you're going to have to think for it all. So here's the next quote. This is the first time R'hllor is mentioned in the World of Ice and Fire.
It is also written that there are annals in Ashai of such a darkness, and of a hero who fought against it with a red sword. His deeds are said to have been performed before the rise of Valyria, in the earliest age when Old Gis was first forming its empire. This legend has spread west from Ashai, and the followers of R'hllor claim that this hero was named Azor Ahai, and prophesy his return.
So you've definitely heard that quote before, but it is the first mention of R'hllor. And we've talked plenty about that prophecy, but we almost always, when we do it, we're looking forward, as in who might be Azor Ahai. We're checking off the boxes, see who qualifies. And we do that with the historical Azor Ahais, the queens in the past, even though we don't know who those figures are. We have names for them. We don't know much about them. So we compare the two. We compare the ancient figures to the current figures. But there's a lot in between all that, right? It's not just about Azor Ahai, obviously, but it is about how these Red Priests behave towards that legend as well, and how the rank and file behave towards that. But I also would guess that y'all didn't realize that was the first time R'hllor was named in that quote, even though it's very familiar. R'hllor and R'lyeh, you wonder maybe if George R. Martin was inspired by the resting place of Cthulhu.
Yeah, it'd be funny. We got a question in the chat just about that just now. It was on people's mind. Yeah, they asked, has there ever been a connection between R'hllor and its priests and the island of R'lyeh and Cthulhu as the great priest? From Joshua Sosa, to which other people have replied saying, that considering we have a connection between the drowned god and Ironborn and stuff like that, there might be a greater connection to water than fire.
Yeah.
But
And if you don't know what the word relay looks like, it's R''Lyeh, whereas R'hllor is R''HLLOR. So it's the R apostrophe is very notable there. And obviously we've pointed out George's connection to Lovecraft plenty of times, so it's I don't know that this is definitely the reason. I don't know. It certainly looks similar. George's connection to Lovecraft is strong, but I don't know for sure that this is the inspiration.
Just so you know, my mind sort of assumed that it might have been red lore. That he might have just kind of mashed those words and changed the spelling to give it some distinctness. But a lot of the words George uses, all the words humans use, have fairly obvious, apparent, Westeros.
Yeah.
So it's not a stretch where those words came from,
That's true. Now, here's the thing, though. The first mention of R'hllor is tricky because, as we mentioned, there's multiple names for R'hllor. Lord of Light is used exclusively in A Game of Thrones. So my guess is George hadn't decided to call the Lord of Light R'hllor yet, because that name does not appear in Book 1 at all. But twist, George has used the name R'hllor since before he ever wrote A Song of Ice and Fire. So he had definitely come up with the name. He just hadn't applied it to A Song of Ice and Fire yet. You know we love the deep cuts here at History of Westeros podcast, and this absolutely qualifies. This quote is George R. Martin himself that we're about to read from Dream Songs Volume 1, Chapter 4, a.k.a. The Heirs of Turtle Castle, where he speaks of his early interest in a fanzine called Cortana. Cortana was big on prose rather than comics. Now, George loves comics, but he can't draw, so he was more drawn to Cortana and submitted a story to it for publication in what seems to have been 1967. Here it is.
Dark Gods of Koryuban, I called it, and yes, my version of Mordor sounds like a brand of coffee. My heroes were the usual pair of mismatched adventurers, the melancholy exile, R'hllor of Raug, and his boisterous, swaggering companion, Argilac the Arrogant.
Yeah, so the real first mention of R'hllor was in Dark Gods of Koryuban. Argilac dies in this story because of his arrogance. So George was killing off characters even when he was writing in college. But R'hllor escapes to tell the tale and live another day. George goes on to point out that though his submission was accepted, it was the last issue of Cortana. Cortana didn't put out another issue after that, so dang it. But so George...
Is the real first A Song of Ice and Fire character to ever die Argilac the Arrogant?
Could be, yeah.
First named character.
So George did start another R'hllor story, only to abandon it because his college roommates found it. He was just sitting there on his table, and they started reading it out loud, and he was kind of chagrined. What's funny is he wrote it in purple. He had a purple pen, he wrote it in purple. And here in our document, whenever Shay is going to read a quote, she marks it in purple, and she didn't know about that. So it's also purple in our document, and here's the description.
In the second, my exile prince finds himself in the Dothrak Empire, where he joins Baron of the Bloody Blade to fight the winged demons who slew his grandsire, King Barristan the Bold.
Yeah, so not 2, not 3, but 4 familiar names. Dothrak, Baron of the Bloody Blade instead of Brandon of the Bloody Blade, King Barristan the Bold, and, of course, R'hllor.
I would say the winged demons aren't too far off either from other things he's described.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You can't go wrong with a winged demon here or there. They're always good to add on, right?
I gotta say, this reminds me a little bit, when I played D&D as a kid, as an adult, there would be a cool character would arise, a character that someone played or an NPC in the world, and we would keep bringing it back. You know what I mean? Even if it was a different setting or time period or but that personality, that idea, that image or whatever would recur in our D&D stories. I imagine George writing did something very similar. He had an idea for a character, and he was just trying to find the right spot for its home.
Yeah. So there was also a book published by Roger Zelazny, who we mentioned, I think it was last time or the time before, the 9 Princes in Amber series.
Yeah, George is a big fan.
Yeah, so that's a big deal, right? So he wrote a book called Lord of Light. And it was also in 1967, the same year as this Cortana and all this other stuff happened. And I've read this book. I've read Lord of Light. Here's the description from Goodreads. It says, Earth is long since dead. On a colony planet, a band of men has gained control of technology, made themselves immortal, and now rule their world as the gods of the Hindu pantheon. Only one dares oppose them, he who was once Siddhartha and is now Mahasamatan, binder of demons, Lord of Light. So basically they're high-tech, making regular humans look like gods, and they impose their will on a planet of people who don't know better. They don't know that it's technology. They think they're real gods. A pretty cool book. Anyway, and surely George has read it because...
Depending on how you define God, that might be real God.
Yeah. The thing is, someone can kill the human and take their place, and the regular people have no idea that happened because they're using the same technology to project themselves. Like, boy, he seems a little angrier today, but or it seems, but they wouldn't know. So so here's the first mention of Lord of Light, which is, as we said, there was no mention of R'hllor in the first book. So this is Daenerys 1, a Game of Thrones, right off the bat.
May the Lord of Light shower you with blessings on this most fortunate day, Princess Daenerys, the Magister said as he took her hand. He bowed his head, showing a thin glimpse of crooked yellow teeth through the gold of his beard.
So there's red priests in that scene as well. So right in Dany's first chapter, you've got mention of the Lord of Light, red priests, and that's important because as we've been over many times within different POVs, the stuff that's in those first few chapters is a really big deal because George is using those elements to set up future stories. Remember, he originally planned it to be a trilogy, so he was packing more in those early chapters, more of those elements that needed to apply later. And of course, he slowed down and spread things out more, but that still leaves those early chapters as unusually thick with what's to come, references to what's to come. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, it isn't just the Lord of Light or R'hllor, there's also the Red God, kind of is the most basic nickname. Now, that name doesn't throw us off too much. There isn't like an earlier mention of Red God. I mean, Daenerys 1, a Game of Thrones. You can't really get much earlier than that in the book, right? So, just for fun also, the fiery heart of R'hllor sigil is all over the Southwest U.S. as a Catholic symbol. It doesn't have the stag in it, but it's just a heart with flame all around, and there's a lot of different versions of that. When I was in Santa Fe, I saw them, like every gift shop had these things. I bought one and gave it to Radio Westeros.
Do you think that's why that's an emoji? Is it, or you think, I wonder if it's a reference, in fact, to that? Because there's a fiery red heart emoji that came out in the last year, and a lot of people in the fandom were obviously like, it's the R'hllor, symbol, and I kind of just thought it was because, people use hearts and fire enough that, like, a fiery heart, but maybe it's meant to be a Catholic symbol.
Yeah, it could be.
I also noticed that emoji and thought that it was unusual. They made an emoji just for
Yeah.
Stannis?
Yeah, it's probably the Catholic.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a combination of hits enough different bases. Maybe that motivated
Yeah, I mean,
them,
someone submitted it in the emoji consortium. It isn't just like they come up out of nowhere. It's like a long process where you have to like submit your proposal to the consortium, and then like people approve it, and then not, we ourselves could come up with an emoji and submit our proposal, and possibly even have it approved. It's pretty cool. If you're not familiar with that, I would read up on emoji consortium. It's interesting. The Unicode. Anyways. Yeah.
So the idea of R'hllor is prominent in a lot of POVs. Some of these you'll know right away, like Davos. Clearly, that's probably the most prominent. Melisandre's 1 chapter, of course, big there. Jon, not early on, but of course, once Stannis and Melisandre and Sleece get to the wall, R'hllor becomes a big part of his story. Sam as well, but only briefly, because Sam's leaves the wall right around the same time that stuff is happening. So he doesn't get too deep into it. He's aware of it, but it's not like circling around him. It's not swirling around his arc currently. Arya, it's starting to show up for her, or was showing up for her, and now it's coming back because she was around Jaqen right away, who mentioned the Red God to her. She saved him from the burning cart, which he claims, okay, you have to pay 3 lives to the Red God for that.
The burning cart? That's not far from the burning heart.
True. And then, of course, she spends time with the Brother Without Banners, who have adopted R'hllor. Once she flees to Braavos, she sort of gets away from it, but there is a Red Temple in Braavos. It does come up, so that'll come back for us as well. Same thing with Tyrion. Early on, he's barely even heard of R'hllor. Doesn't come up. Red God, nothing, doesn't matter. But then in A Dance with Dragons, once he goes to Essos, boom, just everywhere. Constant. He goes to Volantis, sees the huge red temple, it blows his mind. He sees Bonero preaching. Yeah, he gets a fire hose of R'hllor stuff. Or a fire hose of... Well, just fire hose. Okay, that works. Yeah. it's from the water hose. I was trying to do the reverse of water. It's like, no, it's already fire. Yeah. Victarion, of course, has plenty of red god stuff later once he scoops Makoro out of the sea. Asha as well, because she's with Stannis now, and likewise Theon, because he's also with Stannis, starting in the Winds of Winter. So there's quite a lot you can see, and most of these are recent additions to that, and they've come in strong. So like a good half the POVs now have a major presence of R'hllor. You'll notice I didn't mention Daenerys, even though the Lord of Light was the first mention. That one mention of Lord of Light was the first mention of it in the entire series. It hasn't happened again once. Not once. Never again does Lord of Light or R'hllor appear in Dany's chapters. Not once. She thinks of red priests one time. One time. So it's kind of like how Iron Bank is sneakily missing from Arya's chapters. Even when she's in the heart of Braavos, not once does Iron Bank appear. So this is kind of like that, where I think George is trying to keep us from thinking about these connections a little too much. And he's going to bring, it's storytelling reasons. Kind of like how he didn't have Ned Stark think about Jon's parentage, right? That's a little more blatant. But not that I'm not complaining. I'm just saying this is sneakier, right? Because you notice that Ned doesn't think it. You're waiting for him to think more about Jon. It just doesn't happen. Here, I don't know if people are sitting there waiting for Dany to think about the Lord of Light. They might be waiting for Melisandre to finally take notice of Dany. But that's the other way around. So that's pretty interesting, huh? Other places it doesn't come up, which might be also telling. Bran's chapters. Now, there wouldn't be a lot of reason for Bran to be thinking about that. But that just goes to show it fits. The fact that it hasn't been mentioned just fits really well, given where Bran's been and what he's doing. It's natural that it hasn't come up, but it's probably going to. Certainly Melisandre has seen him in her visions and sees him as a demon. She saw him with his wolf head, his howling, and Bloodraven with his wooden face. So they're coming together at some point. It's got to be pretty soon. One mention total in all Cersei's chapters. That's it. Jaime, Sansa, Catelyn, pretty much nothing. Which is interesting for Catelyn because she's now, imbued with the power of R'hllor, but she doesn't have POVs anymore. Jon Connington, pretty much nothing. Quentyn, a little bit. Barristan, not really. Haldon, Halfmaester, is surprised that Tyrion hadn't heard of Bonero, the head priest of the Red Temple in Volantis. He's like, you haven't heard of him? So people in Essos is a clever way for George to show that everyone's heard of Bonero, if you're from Essos. Tyrion's the exception here. Tyrion had only heard of Thoros, and Thoros was sent to Westeros as an attempt to get R'hlorism working in Westeros. They had tried before, it didn't work. At first it was like, hey, Aerys, that guy likes fire. Maybe we can bring him on. Didn't work. Well, for whatever reason. Thoros did get along really well with Robert, though. Not because of the fire stuff, because they were drinking buddies. It still didn't work, though. It still didn't bring... Robert didn't give a crap about the Red God, as far as we know. And there is R'hllor...
I don't think he gave a crap about religion, to be fair. Not
you're right.
Something about the Red God, per se, but
True,
yeah.
The Red God has been in ports for some time. Like Old Town, probably Gulltown isn't explicitly mentioned. King's Landing, there's probably something there. It isn't listed. There isn't some, central list of all the places that there's a Red Temple. But they still, they haven't moved inland. There aren't like Red Temples in the center of the Reach that we know of. They're all pretty much just for sailors, people who want a place to worship their familiar gods. But to people who are living in Westeros, that's not really a thing. What's allowing R'hllor to catch on now? Because it is catching on now. I think it's the same reason that it caught on with Stannis. The real power. They're like, well, we can't deny that's real. This is resurrecting people, and you're not cold. Melisandre's just standing there, and she's warm, and she's not wearing any robes. They're like, this is real power. It's just blatant and obvious and recurring, and they can't just ignore that.
Yeah, not gonna lie, if I was living in the north and I saw someone who just wasn't cold, that would be really appealing to me.
Yeah,
I would be like, what do I have to do to not be cold right now?
Yeah.
I don't want to take away from that point because it is something I have been thinking about because it does seem like we've gotten this, at least a perspective. Our perspective can clearly be skewed, as you just pointed out, right?
Yeah.
But given that, it does seem like there is a rise in popularity, power, whatever of R'hllor. But if the reason for that is because seems to have real power, and is the real power arising to a greater extent than it used to, or is it just better known, or is there a push by priests to spread the word, whether or not the power was there before or not? I don't know. I bring this up partly because there's real power with the old gods too.
True.
But it's not like there's a rise in worship of the old gods, as far as I can tell. Again, it might be also, but
you're right. There's no. That's probably a function of the way that their sort of church is set up. You got red priests out here advocating and preaching at every night fire, at every port. There's not a single priest of the old gods out here saying anything to anyone. They're only like getting in Bran's dreams and things. That's the only thing they do, right? So Melisandre comes and burns the tree at the werewood at Storm's End. No pushback, no consequences that we know of, and that's a sign, right? She burned a werewood and suffered no. It's like Euron. Euron proved that kinslaying isn't hated by the gods. Like, I did it, and they didn't do anything to me. So, are we really sure that kinslaying is such a big deal?
Yet.
See, that's the part he's missing. Is the gods don't work.
And Melisandre is missing.
They don't work on the same timeline that humanity works on. So let's talk about core beliefs of the worshippers of R'hllor. Here's Melisandre explaining the gist of it to an imprisoned Onion Knight. And of course, this is particularly interesting because he's there in prison because he wanted to kill her. Yet, she isn't mad at him. She's still just like, I'm using this as a recruitment opportunity, which is one of the things that makes her a very compelling character. I like this scene a lot. Here it goes.
The war has been waged since time began, and before it is done, all men must choose where they will stand. On one side is R'hllor, the Lord of Light, the Heart of Fire, the God of Flame and Shadow. Against him stands the Great Other, whose name may not be spoken, the Lord of Darkness, the Soul of Ice, the God of Night and Terror. Ours is not a choice between Baratheon and Lannister, between Greyjoy and Stark. It is death we choose, or life, darkness or light. She clasped the bars of his cell with her slender white hands. The great ruby at her throat seemed to pulse with its own radiance. So tell me, Sir Davos Seaworth, and tell me truly, does your heart burn with the shining light of R'hllor? Or is it black and cold and full of worms? She reached through the bars and laid 3 fingers upon his breast, as if to feel the truth of him through flesh and wool and leather.
My heart, Davos said slowly, is full of doubts.
That's a good response. My heart is full of doubts. Yeah. It's a speech a lot like Jeor Mormont's is to Jon Snow, where he says, do you really think our war is more important? Is like Lannister, Baratheon, does it really think that's more important than this? And that convinces Jon. Because he's actually seen the dead walk. Like it's a more convincing from his point of view. He's seen these things from Davos is in a prison cell. He hasn't seen the dead walk. He doesn't know about any of that stuff. So his heart is full of doubts. Had he seen the dead walk? Had he seen the others or anything like that? He might be like, all right, I kind of see where you're coming from. He might at least be a little more willing to understand.
Maybe if he'd seen Melisandre do something crazy like birth a shadow baby.
Yeah, right. That did come later, but yes, you're right. So ironically, the first dead person to see walk for a lot of people might be Jon Snow. Jon Snow might be the first dead walking. Actually, am I wrong about that? No, he did the smuggling thing before being put in prison. Anyway, whatever. That's not important. So yeah, Jon Snow might be the first dead person some people see walking, but that's still a big deal. It doesn't matter who the thing. If you see the dead walk, whoa, and that's real power if it's coming from Melisandre, if she's the one to do it. It's also kind of badass, like Melisandre. I mean, like she convinces Davos. She's so convinced Davos is a good man that she's not worried that he was going to kill her. He's like, yeah, I'm going to convince him not to do that. Don't worry about it. She's just really, that's the kind of confidence that really only comes from belief in a like super, super sincere belief in a higher power, like really powerful faith. And you just, nope, I have no concerns. God's going to take care of that. Right? Just, every morning, Melisandre wakes up and checks for danger to her own person. That's what we see in her chapter. So presumably on this day, when she's talking to Davos, she's already checked. She's like, nah, he's not going to get me. So, and even later, she does all these cool things like really worry about Davos. She like wants to protect his son. She doesn't think the son is like important for some greater role. She just wants him to live and not to have Davos to suffer. There doesn't seem to be any magic about it or any karma or dharma. It's just purely just a human thing to do, which is a really neat part of her character because she's kind of inhuman in a lot of ways, given she's so zealous and so magical and beyond a normal lifespan and age and all these other things.
Those are among the most intriguing moments of the book when you do see the human side of Melisandre. Her chapter is one of the most interesting ones of the whole series to me.
I agree. When we found out she was going to have a chapter, it was like, whoa, because it was so unexpected. Because George has always said that there's characters that know too much, and you won't get their point of view. She just seemed squarely in that category of people that we can't see inside her head because she knows too much. So, man, it was a surprise. She says at one point, "The Lord of Light cherishes the innocent. There is no sacrifice more precious." And then you're like, oh. When she's saying all these other things like, oh, okay, I can kind of believe you there. And then she says that, and you're like, what is that setting up? A certain child's burning or something else awful? Like, that can't end well, right? So, getting deeper into what they believe. It's a dualistic religion. R'hllor versus the great other. Light, heat, and life versus ice and death. The two are in an eternal struggle, a bit like, say, the storm god and the drown god. But there is a prophesied ending, which I think makes it one of the only religions, if not the only religion in the universe with a specific eschatology and messianic figure. That's a note from Nina, and it's a really good take because, yeah, who else has like an avatar? Who else has like a Jesus type figure, a son of God type being that was sent to save everyone, which is what Azor Ahai is according to the prophecy. Someone come to Earth, sent by God to save everyone. And they need your help, though. They can't do it alone. Same with, that is basically a messianic figure, right? But there aren't any other versions of that in Planetos that we're aware of. They may exist, we just don't know them. And it does seem to be building the whole story.
Yeah, well, to be clear, I mean, like, there's other Azor Ahai type figures. It's just not clear to us whether within their religion they're messianic.
Sure. There's no explicitly other religion that has a messianic figure.
Yeah,
is the point.
But between all
other
of those,
cultures believe in an Azor Ahai type figure.
Yeah,
right.
But there's not a religion.
And my point is that within their religion, it's possible that there is that role. We just don't know.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
want to be clear
Absolutely.
on that
There's a lot of religions that haven't been explored, or George hasn't told us about them. So yeah, there's definitely room for that. But what makes it stand out in a storytelling way, because that is a big part of what is building up here in the story, is a final conflict of sorts between humanity and the others, and a religion that has prophesied a final apocalyptic conflict is going to seem correct to a lot of people in the world. They're like, oh, they're the ones that predicted this. They're the ones that saw this coming. They've been writing about this for 5,000, 10,000 years. We should be on board. It's all coming true. All the things they've been saying. That would bring a lot of people into the fold. Making a prediction and having it come true, that's going to sell people. I mean, that works. Like, that's proof of concept. So that's pretty interesting. And as is the case with a lot of singular evil gods or villains, his name is not to be spoken. He's the great other. It's a nickname. You find this as a recurring thing in the real world and in, fictional stories, Wheel of Time, Harry Potter, he who should not be named. There's that concept reoccurs.
It makes me like Euron more. I mean, I don't like the Greyjoys or the Ironborn in general, but I like that part of Euron. Is like, I'll do it. I'll kill him. I don't believe
I'll say the
nonsense.
name. Yeah.
Watch. I'll show you. Yeah.
What's his real name? What name can't I say? Let me say that. Whisper it in my ear. I'll say it.
Yeah.
I'll yell it. Night fires are a big feature of their worship. Since they believe that every day is a gift, that you have to worship and pray all through the night to make sure R'hllor brings the day again. And for that reason, a lot of red priests are nocturnal. They sleep during the day and stay up at night and tend the fires at night, which is kind of like, that's a pretty good gig, actually. But an extremely critical point for R'hllorism that you must grasp to understand its appeal and function within the story is that it is a religion of the masses. It's antithetical to the nobility in many ways. You might say a lot of religions are religions of the masses, if not most, especially in real life. But this is going even farther than that. It's even more like that than others. Aegon the Conqueror took on the Seven as his religion in order to facilitate his rule of the Seven Kingdoms. He wanted to adopt the same religion as the people he was ruling. We don't see that in Essos that we know of. The rulers of Braavos and Volantis and Pentos aren't worshippers of R'hllor that we know of. At least it's not their only, religion that they follow, which R'hllor demands to be the only god. So if they're paying lip service to multiple gods, and they're kind of doing like the wildlings or the others are doing their own version, where they're like, Victarian's version, where, our other gods aren't demons. We don't agree with you on that part. But yes, R'hllor is one of them. We'll add him to our pantheon. That's as far as they're willing to go. But that's still really interesting. Like this back and forth between the power of the nobility and the power of the clergy. That's a real world thing. Endless battle across time and religions and regions and nations, fictional or not. But again, it's more true of R'hlorism given that. Because, for example, this is something we'll get into a little deeper later in the episode, but at least in Volantis and in other places like Ashai, and maybe everywhere, if you're an acolyte or a red priest or a temple sex worker or a temple warrior, you're a slave. From the highest level to the lowest level, you're a slave. Nobility, they aren't going to go for that. That doesn't work for that. Like, you have to enslave yourself to be a member of this temple. That's a bridge too far for people that hold that much social power and that much political power to declare themselves slaves and to give all that up. You do see that in the real world sometimes, right? You see like kings that are super devout Christians or rulers who are extremely devout Muslims, etc. You've seen lots of versions of that. Almost every world religion has something like that in its past. But we don't see like these high-ranking kings that worship R'hllor. It's just, Stannis is kind of an outlier. And even he isn't technically he isn't actually seated on the throne. So that's a really important difference here. The way, like it is in the real world, the way people follow a religion varies from place to place and time to time. But as far as we know, this has been the case for a long time. The way R'hlorism works makes it tough for the rich and powerful to accept and to embrace because of the way it's constructed. It explicitly doesn't allow for some of the behaviors and powers that a rich noble would enjoy in their day-to-day life. Like in the real world, a lot of times what you'd see like a big powerful family take their eldest son and groom him to rule, and send like a younger son into the church to become like a bishop or to have power in the church, so the family is protected on both sides. Like we've got power in the church, we got power with our swords and shields and political power. The Seven doesn't have the same level of power that the medieval Christian church had, but it's pretty powerful. And there you see examples like this, like House Hightower did place people very high in the church hierarchy, still do, including the High Septon. Several High Septons have been Hightowers. Of course, they conveniently lose their last name, which you think that sometimes the nobility might actually want that level of protection, so people forget what house they came from. We almost had a Frey High Septon. Remember that, folks? The High Septon, before the High Sparrow came storming in and was just like elected by popular acclaim, the Frey guy had the inside track to getting that job. So that would have been really something.
I can't tell you the number of thoughts that are.
Yeah, I've been going for a while, so let me let you jump in here for a minute and say what you got to say.
I almost wonder, I feel I need to rein it in because there's already so much to talk about. But let's see if I can remember my different thoughts. One is thinking about Lancel. He is a wealthy, powerful family, member of the nobility, but still kind of abandons it all for a religion, not R'hllor. But it's worth noting that we do see this other religion rising, even though they don't have real power like R'hllor seems to.
So you're right. The faith is on the rise again, if the same reasons
Yeah.
R'hllor is, all this desperation and upheaval, and
we also might have a skewed perspective of how much the faith is on the rise because we're seeing it from the perspective of noble families.
That's true.
Who
Most of the
might feel
characters
more
are-
threatened by it, or more important when they're family members, but maybe the total numbers aren't as big. Or it's hard to say that,
especially
but
Cersei.
It's just, yes, it's something to keep in mind, I guess. So anyway, kind of continuing along that thought, is it in the church or in religion or whatever, there's more of a cap on power. There's power there. And probably the average person who is struggling for food, becoming a priest who is provided for, like they're probably fundamentally given food in a home, right? Once you're at that level of priesthood, the church has the ability to levy taxes of sorts. They do have certain powers. So that amount of power compared to the average commoner, peasant, or whatever, is pretty good and pretty high, and something maybe to strive for. And but for the average noble family would be a downgrade. So you can see,
you're right.
Now it may be higher levels, higher echelons of the church. That now you start to get more to the level of nobility, but not to the level of king. Also, we've talked about this before too. I think it's been a long time. I remember we had a discussion one time about the idea that Tywin, I think we were talking about Tywin at the time. It doesn't be Tywin per se, but in a way, the hand of the king has more power than the king. It's a tricky discussion, but the idea is that the king or people in political positions have certain limitations on their life, like both in this fantasy Martin world and in the real world. There's just people taking pictures of you all the time. There's every action you take, you're being judged for everything you do. You have a certain reputation to maintain, an image to uphold, and you're ostensibly held to a higher standard. Now you can just be corrupt, you can shrug it off, you can use your power more manipulatively, but on some level people make some attempt to live up to their position, which means it is more difficult to commit terrible crimes, or even lesser crimes. Just being mean to someone is like tougher to get away with it. Obviously not that you can't, but Tywin as the hand can talk bad about some other house, where Robert as the king can't. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Tywin can screw that family, they're all dumb or they're ugly, or he has certain liberties that the king doesn't, but still has similar power. Anyway, point is kind of like that in religion. You can't have this wealth ostensibly. You're supposed to be giving to the poor people. You can't commit these crimes. You kind of have to rein your life in, right, to follow the rules of the church if you want to be a leader of the church. So that might be another reason certain members of nobility are like, I don't want to have to do that.
Well, here's a great. I had this note later in the episode, but given what you just said, it fits really well here. Tyrion makes this point. It's kind of he says it kind of rudely, but he's like, give me the priests that are just sit in the back and just abuse people and collect money. He doesn't want those people in charge, but he's like, they're better than the zealots. He's like, you'd rather have them than the zealots. The ones who actually believe in gods cause way more trouble than the ones that just sit in the back and abuse a few people and steal money.
They're more likely to start a war. Yeah. They're more likely to be burning people at the stake.
Exactly.
They're more likely to,
And so he says that. And R'hllorism, that's the problem with R'hlorism. It's specifically designed for that. Like the priests are you don't rise high in the Red Temple with that. Maybe you do in some places. Maybe you do in Bravos because they can't be as hardcore because of the way slavery laws work. But in Volantis, for sure, there's no church hierarchy that is soft and not really a believer. It's too hardcore. These are devout. These are heavy believers, heavy worshipers, hardcore, barefoot, burning themselves, all the they are not in it for the political power types. And that is something that's really important to note about this religion, at least in its current state.
Another point, another thought stirring in me is that it doesn't, generally what you said is true, but it doesn't mean there can't be corruption. It doesn't mean there can't be someone who is ambitious and manipulative, who realizes, I'll play this game of R'hllor to get into this position. Sure, I'll call myself a slave. but I'm going to make sure I have a full belly at night. I'm going to make
Yeah.
sure that, you know, my priest, my home, my circle gets the greater benefit. This is a thought I had for later on too, but I think the idea of everyone is a slave, a lot of the thoughts about R'hllor remind me of the Animal Farm. Like, we're all equal, but some are more equal than others. No, I guarantee you some of those slaves have nicer clothes, nicer transportation, nicer homes, etc. You know,
and you wonder too, but at the top, at the really high church hierarchy, are they just people still though? Like, what I mean by that, Melisandre has been transformed. She's not, some magical power has altered her. So you can't fake that. That's part of what I'm getting at, is if you have to like magically alter yourself or go through some sort of process, there's no faking that. You could still use it for your own benefits, but it's more of a commitment than just, I don't know, saying some words, getting on your knees, praying, doing a vigil, you know, those kind of things. You can fake that. But yeah, it's a little harder. I guess it's a little harder to fake when you're going through like actual magic rituals or whatever. We don't really know exactly what's happened, but something happened.
One other thing I try to keep in mind for discussing this world, and the comment by Tyrion is a really good point of it, is that a lot of our judgments are based on our world and our experiences, our morality, our society. But what if in our world there was this real magical power? It changes things, you know, even without, well, arguably, but, you know, obviously this is like a discussion of history, but you know, whether or not there's really God, whether he has real power, whether the miracles of you know, Jesus and other religions too. But we don't seem to be able to clearly observe them or prove them in modern times, at least, you know, but they really are true in this world.
Yeah.
So if in modern times, if God came out of the sky, if God parted the clouds and like floated down to the White House and said, you all need to vote for Biden or whatever it is, you know, like you would have, some people still might not accept it or believe it, or they're willing to go to hell, but there would just be a shift in how we evaluate things.
Yeah.
At a minimum, there would be a huge shift in how the world evaluates things. So in this world, when there really is this power over lore and dragons and on, I can see why maybe Stannis does burn people alive. You know what I mean? It's
better than the
easy
alternative.
To judge him.
Yeah.
Right. It's easy to judge him when you don't understand or believe in this real definitive power that he is faced with. And Tyrion kind of reflects that there. He's like, give me the priests that just sit in the back and, you know, they're corrupt. You know, they're not good people, but they're not going to be radical and start wars. Yeah. Right. But maybe if there's freaking zombies coming, we need to start a war, right?
Yes.
Like maybe R'hllor, you know, even if it
That's
seems
what
bad.
Melisandre's saying. Yeah.
Right. Even if it seems bad for the status quo, even if it seems bad for stability, even if it seems bad for the lives of innocents, it might be good for the future of humanity.
Yeah. Good point. So Stannis isn't just an outlier in Westeros as far as we know. He might be an outlier, period. Meaning, when else have we seen a ruler just get in good with the Red Priests and use their power to their own ends? I suspect that's part of the problem. The Red Priests aren't just going to prop up some ruler and give them their power to do with what they want. Stannis is getting Melisandre's power because she thinks he's Azor Ahai. This isn't just some, we're going to team up and my magic and priest power with your blood claim and Baratheon name. We can do great things together. There was that thought that people thought maybe that's what Melisandre's angle is. Once we saw inside her head, though, all that went away. No chance of that. We saw her sincerity from her own POV, and that just, all those theories went out the window.
Stannis also, by the way, he's not this corrupt figure.
No, he's not.
Even if he's misguided or mean or whatever, he's not angling with corruption to take over because he's ambitious.
Right. He might be misunderstanding the importance of claims versus humanity, but he's not doing it for gain. He's not trying to enrich himself. He might be making too much out of his rights.
Can you hear me?
But I'll follow you for sure. So
dancing's enjoined.
Oh.
So it's going to be curious when and if Makoro meets Dany and tries to win her over in a manner similar. Like, he can also be like, yes, you're Azor Ahai. I'm going to tell you the same kind of things that Melisandre told Stannis, and you're the prophesied savior of the world. And if she believes that, if she's convinced, then, well, I don't know what she'll do. but she might be more amenable to the type of rule or a type of seeing regular people and treating regular people decently, like the Red Priest would require, and that Dany would do that. Both arcs point north towards the others, right? I mean, Relorism is notable for its coverage. Relorism is notable for its coverage of so many opposing themes, right? So these things can come to a head and come together even by accident. It would be really interesting for Dany to arrive in the north when Stannis is still alive. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. And boy, that would be wild. What if Makoro meets Melisandre? How will that go? No idea. But consider ancient Valyria, Dany and her dragons. Relorists see dragons as symbols of fire. Well, Relorists see everything as a symbol of R'hllor. The whole world was created by R'hllor. But of course, a dragon, a being of fire, they're going to particularly want to be like, yeah, that's right there in R'hllor's wheelhouse, like volcanoes and the doom of Valyria. All these other things R'hllor would probably say comes from their god. Thus, it's easy to look and understand this connection. But the Valyrians, as far as we know, didn't see it the other way around. They didn't see R'hllor as deity to their dragons. They had Valyrian gods, and they worshiped them, and we don't know a lot about them. But if any noble country, any nobility of any nation were going to embrace R'hllor, it might have been the Valyrians, but even they didn't. Again, probably because of this whole power dynamic thing where the Valyrians were mad powerful. They wielded so much power, and I don't think that the Red Priests, dogma would allow for that. So it just doesn't work. So that's part of why they tolerated them, like they tolerated other religions, but they mostly probably just ignored them. We've never heard of, like, Aegon the Conqueror didn't have anything to do with them that we know of, and, he would have lived around them, or his ancestors would have, rather. And, yeah, it's an open question, a big open question that we'll continue to explore throughout this episode, is what is the connection between the Valyrians and R'hlorism, and what do R'hllorists see the dragons as? Obviously, Melisandre expects Stannis to wake dragons from stone, so she sees dragons as part of the whole thing. Part of the defeat of the Great Other involves dragons, waking them from stone, which Dany has already done. And yeah, so that's a whole big ball of theory and mystery that I love to think about.
That you're inspired another little thought on me, by the way, the idea that it is easy for R'hllor when it's like light and shadow. Well, like, what is not light or shadow, right? It's pretty easy for them to incorporate things into their religion when you're so generic in your fundamental belief. And I started wondering how they would incorporate other gods or demons into their, like the drowned god, I think, would be in the shadow. That's underwater. There's no light getting to it, so that's a demon.
Yeah.
That's too big of a tangent. But I wonder if you could go through and think of the different gods and how R'hllor would interpret them.
Yeah.
The answer being almost all of them demons, right?
I bet that's what, like, red priests or young red acolytes, whatever they're called, they sit around, they debate, like, when they're in their little version of seminary, and they're like, debate the nature of shadow. Like, is a shadow?
Yeah.
Is like, well, if it's total darkness, is that just one giant shadow, or is that, like when the moon puts its shadow and it covers the entire earth, or the sun? That's a shadow. That's a giant freaking shadow. But you would, if the entire world is cast in darkness, like, I don't know.
There's degrees of shadow too. Like, just a shadow doesn't make something become completely black and covered, unless there's a complete loss of light. So something is partly in a shadow, or anyway.
Yeah. That's neat. So let's talk.
I'm not joining R'hllor. I'm not debating this.
Yeah, we're not in R'hllor seminary school. Hey, it's RSS. Oh my God, R'hllor controls all podcasts. It's a terrifying discovery. All right, let's delve into some real world religions for a minute. I'm sure you all have heard the comparison of Zoroastrianism to R'hlorism, and I was a little surprised. I hadn't studied much about Zoroastrianism, and I was a little surprised at what I found here. The comparisons aren't what I thought they would be. To start off, Zoroastrianism has, it's kind of hard word to say, Zoroastrianism has pretty much nothing to do with fire. So that right there was like, I was expecting more fire stuff, but pretty much nothing there. It's more about some of these other things, which we'll see here. It's Iranian in origin. It's one of the oldest faiths. It goes back possibly to 2000 BC. It enters the historical record around 650 BC. So there's a lot of historical fog in that region there. The god of Zoroastrianism is called Ahura Mazda, Lord of Wisdom, Lord of Things. Predicts good. It predicts that good will triumph over evil, like as in R'hllor will eventually defeat the Great Other. It does predict a final conflict and a victory for good. When this occurs, all souls that have died throughout all history will rejoin Ahura Mazda and live forever, which is really similar to what Bonero says. This is a translation. Tyrion is asking, or rather, this isn't a translation. This is Haldon reporting on what he's heard. And here's the quote.
Bonero had sent forth the word from Volantis. Her coming is the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. From smoke and salt was she born to make the world anew. She is Azor Ahai returned, and her triumph over darkness will bring a summer that will never end. Death itself will bend its knee, and all those who die fighting her cause shall be reborn.
So yeah, you go. Rejoining the souls will... death itself will bend its knee, live forever. Souls joining Ahura Mazda, so that's pretty similar. The ultimate purpose of Zoroastrianism is to bring happiness to the world, to help with that battle. So if you're a follower of Zoroaster, your job is to bring happiness to the world because happiness helps fight that end battle. Kind of cool, actually. Not the worst religion I've ever heard. However, early Zoroastrianism had a tenet to eliminate evil species, which that's not so good because who decides what's an evil species? You could easily see that being like, you point at a certain people like with a certain skin color or certain other worshippers of a different god, be like, that's an evil species, get them, like,
or just people on the other side of the river or whatever, the people in the land that we want to have.
Yes, very abusable.
They must be evil.
Very abusable tenet of the religion there. That's not so good. So they venerated nature. They had spiritual equality of the sexes. In other words, like, in terms of being reborn, they believed in reincarnation, and they believed in relative equality of the spirit. However, it wasn't as equal as all that, because they thought that in order to be properly reincarnated, you had to be a man. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. That's wrong. That's for the next one. That's Catharism. I'm getting my two familiar ones mixed up. Scratch that. Cut that. So... they do have spiritual equality of the sexes. I wasn't wrong about that. But starting over from that point, they have a huge influence on other world religions. Zoroastrianism may be the first appearance of angels and demons, heaven and hell. They didn't call it heaven, but it was basically heaven. It was a good afterlife and a bad afterlife. Hell, same thing. They believed in judgment after death and in free will. So there wasn't destiny, which is a pretty important religious concept, whether you have free will or destiny. Zoroaster is also known as Zarathustra. You've maybe heard the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is also hard to say. He was the prophet that founded it. He claims Ahura Mazda was omniscient but not omnipotent, which is why Ahura Mazda needs help fighting evil, and thus acts through agents called Ahuras. So, like, if you're the higher being in this religion, you are an Ahura, kind of like an angel. And this fits really well with our Azor Ahai headcanon. There are multiple Azor Ahais because there's lots of Ahuras. There's multiple Ahuras, and these are the top agents of fighting evil.
Including Star Trek.
Yeah, Ahura, yes, also. Yes, Ahura also fought Star, yeah. And Sean, you looked into this concept called Asha a little bit, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't know that much about Zoroastrianism. The vague ideas in my head were that it seemed to have heavily influenced the Abrahamic religions. This shifting of, like, the Greek gods with this, lightning in the ocean and everything else, rather than there's one God, and there is a sort of a parallel evil, a Satan, all these things you just said. Almost everything you said, if you had just been talking about, like, Judaism, a lot of that would have fit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, change the name.
But but there was also it's both a concept and a character in Zoroastrianism called Asha.
And to be clear, it is Asha spelled like Asha Greyjoy. Yeah, so just in case that's not clear, folks.
But I was, like, keying in on it because I was going to bring it up later when we talked about Ashai, because it's such a similar SHA, right?
You're right.
And it's this idea. It's something along the lines of truth, okay? But it's like, that's not if you kind of think about like, I don't know, putting a puzzle together, like there's only one way for these pieces to fit into these pieces. So that's like truthful, but it's also correct. It like works right. You see all those in the same kind of realm.
Yeah.
I think that, and you know, maybe even should argue that like justice and truth are correct, that they should be part of the universe as much as gravity or an inertia or something like. Anyway, I think that's
Yeah.
I know I'm not doing the best job explaining it, but that's kind of the concept of Asha.
Right on.
But also, it's a figure, and that figure is very associated with light and fire. Light brings out the truth, reveals the truth. Fire creates light. Anyway, I could go on and on, or you could read a Wikipedia article and learn more than I can explain right now.
We've inspired
but anyway,
some people to check it out. Yeah.
When it's called Ashai by the shadow,
Yes.
and if Asha represents fire, light, truth, the shadow
fire
that is
shadow.
by, I wonder if that's at least part of what was in Martin's brain when he was naming
That's
these
a
places.
great catch. I like
characters.
that. Yeah. That's very fitting. Yeah. One thing that is kind of an opposition to that, not in disagreement, but in opposition, like mirror image, opposing the Zoroastrian's big on, like I said, protection of the elements, protection of like ecology, but earth, fire, air, and water. They wanted those elements needed to be preserved properly. Ashai is where those things have just gone to hell. The water you can't drink. There's no kids. There's no animals because it's just toxic or whatever. It's not entirely certain why, but for the animals, it's because of the toxicity. The shadow is some sort of strange blight on the land. It's not fully explained. It could be magical, but yeah. So it's kind of like, yeah, this is where these things have gone wrong. The opposite way. So. Unrelated to Zoroastrianism, but related to Persia and Iran, which is where this comes from, are the immortals, which you may have seen in the movie 300, wearing weird masks, which they were a real thing, though. They didn't really have those masks, but they were a unit of 10,000 men. Some people think that number was exaggerated. But it was formed by, in the time of Cyrus the Great, and ruled by a woman named Pantea Arteshbot. She may have founded this unit, which is kind of cool. And so the way they functioned was there's 10,000 of them, and whenever one would die, they would immediately put a replacement in. So it would seem to outsiders like there was always exactly 10,000. When one would die, they would be immediately replaced. It would kind of felt like they were immortal because there would always be 10,000 of them. Compare that to the fiery hand of R'hllor, of the Temple of Volantis. There's 1,000 of them, and whenever one of them dies, they replace them. So it's the same concept, and they're called, they're not called the Immortals, but it's the similar idea, and it's 10,000 instead of 1,000. For once, the real world version is larger than George's version. It's the other way around. You'd think the real world would be 1,000, and George would be like, 10,000, yeah, let's go with that. But nope.
There's a million of them.
Yeah, there's a million of them. So that's pretty cool. Super chat from TKOK Podcast Network. That's our good friend Tommy Pappas saying, shout out to the Cathars. What's your deal with the Cathars, Tommy? Why are you such a fan of the Cathars?
He did his thesis on the Cathars.
No
for
kidding.
His history degree, he said.
What?
Yeah. So that's interesting.
Well, damn, I should have talked to him about some of this.
I know,
Should have got
right?
some notes from him.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so here's Catharism. This is going to be even briefer than the bit on Zoroastrianism, but it's explicitly something George has said is an influence on R'hllor'ism. He specifically said Catharism, Zoroastrianism are the big influences here. It's like the dualistic version of Christianity. Imagine that instead of Satan, there is a Satan, but there's two gods, the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. The Old Testament God created the material world, and he's a jerk. The New Testament God created the spiritual world, and he's great. The material world is thus evil, and everyone's goal is to regain angelic status by rejecting the material world, by rejecting corruption. They don't believe in resurrection. They didn't believe in the resurrection, notably, which was a problem for other Christians, especially the Pope and Catholic Church. But they did believe in reincarnation. So not only did they not accept the resurrection, they didn't accept the Trinity. Reproduction is evil under their... This is a flaw in the religion as far as gaining power in the world. Hard to spread a religion when you believe that reproduction is evil because it continues the cycle of earthly reincarnation. And your goal is to be reincarnated as a spirit and to rejoin the spirit world, then you're just perpetuating this cycle of earthly existence by reproducing. They also thought violence was bad, so that's cool. I can get behind that. Now, here's where I got confused earlier. The spirits are genderless, and so they had some equality there. However, they thought you had to be a man to fully transcend. So your final form had to be male, which It was kind of lame. But then they moved forward, and it got worse. Like, political corruption started to happen. They just started to write women out of things. They started like, you know what? Let's take even more power away from women. Well, it's a recurring feature of world history. Really stinks. But so this started also. This didn't help that religion survive either. You know, taking half of their people and reducing their level of power. That's not very smart. So they thought the cross was a symbol of torture. I can kind of agree with that. Catholic Church was so against them that they formed the Inquisition. Yes, the Inquisition. Nobody suspected it. Yeah, it's rough to joke about the Inquisition, I guess, but Monty Python did such a good job of it that
no one expects it.
Nobody expects it. That's right. So the Inquisition was formed in response to the Cathars, and some Cathars. This is wild. Some Cathars believed that Eve's daughters slept with Satan's demons to create giants. Where did that come from?
That was me.
That was you.
That was me, actually. Yeah. I know it doesn't make sense. All these other religious ideas do make sense, but this one doesn't. But it's true. It was me. Yeah.
Also, they were pescatarian. They didn't eat cheese, eggs, milk, or meat either, and nothing that's a product of reproduction. So milk is a reproductive thing. You know, eggs are reproductive things. They wouldn't eat any of that. Cheese obviously comes from milk. So they thought animals carried reincarnated human souls, so you don't want to eat an animal that's carrying a human reincarnated soul. You might say, but wait, fish reproduce sexually, do they not? Like, why do fish get a carve out when they also reproduce sexually? Yes, indeed, fish do reproduce sexually, so you're not wrong if that's what your thought was. But folks in the 1200s didn't know that. They thought...
So do apples.
Yeah.
So do fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, it's true. That is technically sexual reproduction.
I understand that they didn't understand that. But.
Yeah. So, yeah, they believed in this thing called spontaneous generation. They thought that, like, you know, fleas could just be born in straw and... Now, the Cathars weren't alone in this. Don't get me wrong. Like, everyone thought this. Not everyone, but it was commonly held belief. There's also one other one here, our third real-world religion, which is Manichaeism, which George doesn't mention Manichaeism, but it's huge in the Accursed Kings, and the Accursed Kings is a huge influence on George. So, and anyway, here's a quote. Sean or Shay, will you read this quote where the italicized part begins in just a second as I set it up? There's a character called Guillaume de Nogaret in the Accursed Kings, and he's a son of Cathars, and when he's dying of poison, he envisions all these ghosts of tortured Cathars, and they honor things like suicide because of their beliefs, and, you know, it's all these things that are in opposition. Like, I'm sure someone like Tommy could have filled out a lot more of this. But here's another quote that really expresses a similar worldview of R'hllor and the Great Other that you'll find familiar.
There is not one God, there are two, the God of light and the God of darkness, the Prince of good and the Prince of evil. Before the creation of the world, the inhabitants of darkness rebelled against the inhabitants of light, and the vassals of evil, in order to exist, for evil is death and annihilation, devoured part of the principles of good. And then, since the two forces of good and evil were in them, they were able to create the world and engender mankind, in whom the two principles are not only mingled, but in perpetual conflict, though evil is predominant because it is the natural element of their origin.
Yeah, Druon himself wasn't a big fan of the Cathar, so when he writes about it in his book, he kind of throws some shade at them. And so his characters that are Cathars maybe aren't cast in the best light. But anyway, Manichaeism is pretty fascinating. There's a guy named Mani who got it all started, and I don't want to delve into that because we spent enough time on these things. But you'll note, as I said at the beginning of this section, not much to do with fire in any of those, right? There wasn't like Zoroaster... The Cathars, nothing at all to do with fire, really. However, they all have to do with light. And in ancient times, light and fire are more closely related than they are now. We, in the real world of current times, have lots of light sources that have nothing to do with fire, like electricity and other things like that. Ancient folk had none of that. All light came from fire, especially if you count the sun being fire, except for, you know, I guess there's a few exceptions, like bioluminescence. But whatever, they didn't have much access to that in ancient times either. So pretty much it's all fire, like 99%. So that helps explain this gap between fire gods and light, and it's making that association. I think that's a really important piece of info to make that connection. Still, if we're talking about the real world and fire gods, there's a lot. Ra is a sun god, but that's a god of light and, fire. Vulcan, the Roman god of the equivalent of Hephaestus. Prometheus stole fire to give to the people. He's a god of fire. Even though he's not like a fire god, he's associated with the gift of fire, which is crucial. There's a Hindu god named Agni. There's a dozen fire gods in Filipino mythology. And of course, they're associated with related topics like volcanoes, forges, hearths, and of course the sun. And that's where R'hllor lands in the grand scheme of things. All light is the gift of R'hllor, and so are shadows, as we've been talking about on and off, because as Melisandre explains, without light, there cannot be a shadow. It's just darkness. There's light gives birth to shadows. It's an interesting point. I kind of like how George plays with that, the semantics of shadows. I think that's very clever. That argument's probably been made elsewhere in fiction or nonfiction, maybe, but I hadn't seen it before, A Song of Ice and Fire, and I thought it was really cool. Well, did you remember when you read that for the first time, Sean, or Shea, that whole bit about shadows being a child of the light? How convincing was that argument to you when you read it, or had you ever seen that before?
I feel like I've seen it somewhere else, but I don't know if it was before or if it was after.
Okay.
Or where it was. But I feel like I have seen that concept somewhere.
Okay.
I don't know about Sean, but
I honestly don't remember taking particular note of it at the time.
Okay, right on.
Obviously, it's it and many things you could ponder on a lot, but I just didn't happen to. So,
I mean, if you phrase it another way too, Melisandre would say light gives birth to shadows, and in her case, it's particularly literal. But yeah. Are there any? Wonder about that. So it is quite literal. I suppose male red priests can't do that, or are female red priests more powerful because they can do that? And could they do that in all eras, like with the magic waning and waxing? Was Melisandre able to do that 50 years ago? I'm guessing no, but maybe. Like not all of her magic was gone. Like there still was magic even in the low magic era. It just was less. Anyway, let's take
I will say I have thought a lot about the idea you need to have good. You need to have evil to have good.
Yeah.
That's like a concept, and you need to have light to have shadow, and I don't know. I understand where those statements come from, but I just don't know quite for sure if I agree or completely believe in them. Like it might just depend on how you define good or light or shadow. Like, is there any light in justice? You have to start thinking symbolically metaphorically, exactly, and like, is it good for gravity to work? I guess I don't know if there's any moral implications for inertia or forces of nature to occur. And
some people say justice should be blind, right? Too. That's another kind of like that's a metaphor, but you're right. But it's like
blind. I guess it's supposed to be blind.
It's a different
biases,
context. Yeah,
is what it means,
it's a different context, but still, it's there.
Anyway.
Like it's a thought exercise.
And by the way, that is another part of Zoroastrianism, because I do think that they like put the adjective good in front of truth, so that there's implying there's also a bad truth. And so like it is truthful that I wrecked my car, but it's not good. You know what I mean? So
it's a true thing. It's a real thing that happened, and it's good that you accept it. Maybe I don't know. I'm no Zoroastrian, so I can't interpret these things. This is all new to me. All right, let's take a quick break with some questions from you all, and then we'll get into the history of the Red Priests and some more things like that. What else is in the second half of this episode? We'll be talking about a few of the Red Temples, comparing, say, the Red Temple in Volantis to the one in Bravos, where the laws and culture are very different. Then we'll talk about a little bit of parallels and supernatural elements, and then the outlook for the rest of the series. We've got some good stuff there. Well, let's get to it, because we got a lot to cover. Super chat from Tony Sled up in Canada. Melisandre sees a, quote, great enemy in the flames. She seems to be terrified. Do we think this is an entity / person / god that all R'hllor followers oppose? Yeah, okay, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked, because I wonder if Melisandre isn't seeing the great other, or seeing the winter of the north, seeing this news about the others, and just making the assumption that this is the fit for what her religion says. Like, well, my religion has predicted that there's this great demon of ice that's going to emerge, this great antithesis to our R'hllor. And that seems to be it in the north. Look at that. And she's seeing what she wants to see. Maybe this is just something that has nothing to do with R'hlliorism. It's just a power in the world. And she's seeing what she wants to see, kind of calling it, fitting it to her religion. So the great enemy isn't necessarily the one defined by her belief system, but I believe it is a legitimate threat. She is seeing a real thing. It's something that she has to perceive through her own senses, the limitations of what she knows and understands. And she recognizes it as terrifying, which, if she's not terrified by... I mean, R'hllor is terrifying, I think. So she's not terrified by R'hllor. She's terrified by this. I think it's hard for me to imagine that she's wrong. Maybe she's wrong about certain details, especially given that there's more evidence, like the others are right there. She's in the right place for that. So I think that it's what they envision as their enemy. I don't know that it's what their religion identified 10,000 years ago as the correct thing to be worried about 10,000 years later. But it certainly seems to be falling into place pretty much as they said, in a lot of ways. So it's hard to, you wouldn't try to attempt to argue that Melisandre's wrong at this point. I mean, about Stannis, yes, but about the great enemy, no.
It's all these prophecies and visions can all be tricky.
Oh, yeah.
I wonder if it's possible the great enemy she sees is Euron, because Euron is going to disrupt Azor Ahai, defeating the others. And she's not even seeing the others because that's handled. She's seeing Euron because he's going to stop what should be handled.
He's the one that's the danger. Yeah.
There's ways you could look at this differently.
It's not the gods. It's this person calling, unleashing these energies on the world or whatever. Yeah, I totally could see that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd think maybe there would be something distinct about this image, but nothing is. I mean, there's nothing distinct about it. It's just this great enemy. There's no description whatsoever. There's not a vague outline. There's certainly no eye patch, but there's no blue lips. That would give it away, though. That would be just too obvious. Be like, oh, eye patch.
Imagine if you were looking into flames.
One-eyed being.
Imagine if you were looking into flames and you're, looking for the image of a knight or a zombie or a castle or whatever. But what was being presented to you was a kraken. Could you make that out in the flames? Would you realize what you were seeing?
Maybe not.
Could you even know? Does that make sense? Am I just like flickers of light? I don't know.
Melisandre says it takes years and years and years to learn to read those flames. Well, I don't even know what that entails, what they're doing, like how their eyes and what they're focusing, what they're thinking. I don't know. Yeah, it's just like wouldn't begin to know what's going on in her head or eyeballs when she's doing that. So yeah, hard to say.
Can I take a moment to chat about something?
Absolutely.
So you asked about the idea of, I guess, light creating shadow and that relationship,
Yeah.
And so there's a couple TV tropes pages that are relevant here. Everyone knows I love TV tropes. They've got one for the sacred darkness, which talks about all, different examples of sacred darknesses in media and TV, where they do reference Song of Ice and Fire, but they bring up things like a book where Nyx, is associated with shadows at night, but also says others worship her as dawn, saying that, those are conflated together, in other words. And where it talks about how God is all about light and Christianity, but also keeps people in the shadow of his wing, is frequently referenced.
Okay.
And shadow is considered a good thing, a positive thing.
Certainly is when the sun's too hot.
Yeah, exactly. When he provides a cloud to shade people from the sun each day. Anyway, so shade and shadow are positive, respites from the light.
It's nice to have nighttime when the day's been really hot. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, anyways, there's a lot of different examples of that kind of relationship. Anyways, I put the link to the TV tropes page. There's also a TV tropes page for light is not good. That goes into, that same idea, like, is R'hllor really good? Especially when we talk about the idea of, like, an eternal summer and stuff like that. We're like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, like, if you're just going to replace eternal winter with eternal summer, like, it's not better. Maybe it's slightly better. You you last a little longer, maybe. I don't know. It's not good, though. It's still a unsustainable end state. So, and there's going to be a little more on that. We're going to come back to some a variation on this question a little later in the episode, but we'll get there. Sarah Aikenhead from 2 weeks ago, responding to the clan milk snakes. She says that milk snake is a non-venomous snake related to king snakes, and it goes into barns to eat mice. It got the name because farmers thought they were drinking milk from cows. She sent a picture too, which I didn't include, but they look pretty ordinary. They don't look like milk snakes. They look like, she says, they look like king snakes. Yeah. So they look just like banded, they're not all white or anything. So there you go. So that could be it. All right. Farrell75, also from last time. Could Nettles be related to Corlys Velaryon? It's possible. I mean, we just don't know. We don't know much about Nettles' parentage other than there's someone with dark skin in her ancestry because she has dark skin. That had to come from somewhere. But there's a whole nother parent. There's grandparents. I would doubt it, though, because I think the message behind Nettles is that you don't have to have dragon blood to tame a dragon, given that she did it through trust and, I'll bring you meat every day until you get used to me. So I think the story's better if she doesn't have Valyrian blood. If she does, that's fine too, though. I mean,
yeah, I'd say I personally do think she has Valyrian blood.
Okay.
I don't have any doubt in my mind personally that I think she has Valyrian blood. Whether it's a lot, I think she has some. Is my point. I think a lot of people on Dragonstone have some, though.
Yeah, it's true.
Like,
it's hard
the
to find
point-
someone
like,
with no Valyrian blood on Dragonstone.
She still used her skills and her wiles to tame a dragon. It wasn't the Valyrian blood that made the difference, but I don't know that she would have had any success if she hadn't had even like a drop. Like, I kind of think you need to have a drop.
It's entirely possible. Maura Lee with some questions. What do you?
That sounds like pretty Valyrian elitism.
Yeah, I mean, it also sounds kind of weird to be like, oh, there's like black girl can't be Valyrian to me as well. To be honest, like just be like,
yeah.
I want to be I careful with like, let's just not say there's no way Nettles could be or should be, because like a lot of people like the idea of Nettles being Valyrian or of her having Targaryen blood. Anyways.
Questions from Morley. What do you see as Melisandre's role moving forward in the last two books? Do you see her taking an active role in trying to defeat the others like she tried to in Season 8? Do you see her character dying at the end of the book series similar to how she died in Season 8 of Game of Thrones? I think the easiest question is, I think yes. Basically, it is very similar. And yes, I do think she'll die. Maybe not the same way, but I don't think she is part of the Dream of Spring. I think her purpose is to die fighting the others. That is her devout reason for existence, what she's prepared for. And I think she'll leave it all on the battlefield, so to speak. So yeah, I don't think she'll survive, but I think she will not die. I don't think she'll die the way she died in Season 8. I don't think it'll be like this Arya stuff and closing of the eyes and all that. But she's not going to hold back. I think she's going to pour her energy, everything she's got, into winning. And she means it. It's hard for me to see someone like that living through it all. Also, just from a storytelling perspective, she's like she's kind of destined for that. What do you think, Sean? You think there's a chance she'll live, or?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know how to say this. I don't know if it's important. I feel like the more I think and contemplate this whole world and storyline, I think it's bigger than I said earlier. It's bigger than the lifespans of these characters. I think that the impact she has is significant beyond whether she lives or dies or when or how she lives or dies. I mean, obviously it's interesting to think about. Obviously, characters that like feel more connected to Arya or Jon or something, like we want them to make it, But I feel like the scope of this story is so much bigger that, like, especially when we kind of know she's like really old in the first place. It's if early on, if someone had been asking, do you think Aemon's gonna live?
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I mean,
he's
maybe,
100,
but he's
like,
gonna die anyway. He's just really old, Like, so it's not like I'm rooting for him to make it to the end. It just makes sense that he's gonna die because he's old. Whether he's probably not gonna go swinging an axe into a battle and die like that. But
yeah, that would be cool. She says, do you see the fiery hand taking on a role to help defeat the others? Yes, I absolutely do. I think any of the warrior class of R'hllor, which that's what they are, that is one of their chief reasons for existing. Obviously, their day-to-day role is to protect the other worshippers of R'hllor, to keep the church's interests in line, to make sure no one does violence against other R'hllorists. but this is the ultimate evil. This is like if Satan came to Earth. This was just kind of like if Satan came to Earth during the Crusades, would the Crusaders have fought him? I would hope so. Like this is the guy this is the guy that you're against, right? So so I do think so, and I think this does touch back to season 8, or actually, I guess it was season 7 when Melisandre left and was like, "I'm going to Essos," and then she just came back and had done some things, but she didn't bring anyone with her, and we thought maybe she's going to bring some R'hllor worshippers. We thought maybe that was going to be a thing because it's way set up in the books. They just didn't want to bring in any more, a whole nother army of people. I guess they didn't want to deal with that. But I do think that will happen in the books, and the Fiery Hand will be like the most prepared for that. They'll be the rank and file R'hllorists who are maybe zealous and wanting to do their part. And then the guys who are actually trained to be warriors, who are probably going to be, the front line, maybe fighting alongside even guys like the Unsullied.
The Fire Hand, that's that 1,000,
Yeah.
that group that stays 1,000 all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder how they'll replenish their numbers as they travel across the ocean and engage battle in a new land. I don't know.
Yeah, they may have to be bringing. Well, if there's like tens of thousands of regular R'hllor, maybe they'll recruit from that group.
Which I had thought about that in the first place. Is probably not just 1,000 of them that live in a barracks and one dies. Like, what do we do now?
Yeah.
There's probably a system for moving people.
Yeah,
in
they probably have waiting in the wings. Like next up, you're next, dude. You're number 1001. And then after that, yeah.
But that does also imply that they might bring over 5,000 soldiers, not just 1,000.
Yeah, because that's just the Fiery Hand. The Fiery Hand, to be clear, is the 1,000 of the Temple of Volantis. That's not just like some order that exists through all the churches. That's just the Red Temple of Volantis. So the Red Temple at least could have 1,000 also.
And have like support staff, right? Too.
Yeah. You got to have squires and little red squires and all these little dudes.
Take care of the horses and the food and the armor and the blacksmiths and the
Even more confusing to me is the temple prostitutes. There's temple sex workers. They're slaves like all the rest. Who I imagine George considered having Tyrion sleep with one of them as a plot point to bring some information out, because that would have been that would have fit with his character, right? And but he didn't. So we haven't even, as far as I know, we haven't even seen one of these temple sex workers yet. So what's their deal? I mean, we've seen plenty of that in the real world and other religions where sex and religion are combined into a thing. Like in the Summer Isles, that's a thing as well. But this isn't very explored at this point in the story. So I don't know what they're like. Maybe that's part of. Are they just for other worshipers, or are they part of the church's money making operation? Because we don't know where the church gets its money either. They don't have these big, like the hierarchs. We don't know how their temple leadership even works. Benero's the head priest of the temple of Volantis, but what's his standing with the Red Temple in Lys and the one in Ashai? And we don't know how they work together, if at all. And there's no Red Priest Pope, the Relope. I don't know what you'd call him or her.
I felt a little gross when I started contemplating those Red Priest sex workers. It's are they there to serve the other Red Priests? How is this recruiting?
Do they even want
this is
to?
a dark thing.
They're dark.
Are they there to
just
just generate income for the church? How voluntary is this slave? Remember I said some are more equal than others. I don't know.
Pretty much everyone is given as a child. From what we understand, is most of them are brought in as kids. So which is true for a lot of just organizations all over.
That it gets darker when you think of it like that.
Yeah,
it
really does.
If the 25-year-old woman decides she wants to commit her life to R'hllor, okay.
Yeah.
If the 12-year-old girl is thrust into it, I don't know. I don't like the idea of that.
My question there is that with the power of glamour, is in terms of the sex work going on, could you be a 90-year-old woman still working,
looking like you're
20? Yeah, could you be doing that? And I don't know.
Well, if that's the case, those temple brothels could probably make a lot of money.
You don't.
You never know, ever retires, and they just you don't have to train new people. Jeez. Yeah, that is wild to think about. Jeez.
But it also might make it so that it's somewhat of a appealing position for some people, if it means that you get
something you earn or graduate to.
You get to look good for a long time and get it might make it more of a high, like it might be something someone aspires to.
Yeah, and if like,
or it might not be
because they
opposite.
allow you use of the magic. That,
Yeah.
you know, like you wouldn't learn those glamours otherwise. You wouldn't be able to learn the magic otherwise, and
Because I feel like there is a hierarchy. Like there is something that like a slave could aspire to be more like a Melisandre and a free agent versus someone could be, you know, just a fiery hand.
yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy. We just don't know what it is very well. It hasn't been explained to us. And yeah, so it does leave a lot of room to wonder. And yeah, like for example, someone like Makoro does like what use does he have for sex? He's probably like, he might be like 200 years old. Does he even care? Can he even function? Does he want to? Melisandre can because she's birthing shadow babies, but that's, you know, a different set of equipment there.
Yeah, it's still not a matter of whether she wants to. Like, we don't really get an idea of whether she's taking pleasure from that. It's just like a means to an end.
She does take pleasure in feeling the fire inside her, like which has nothing to do with sex, but it's just like she thinks of it as ecstasy.
Yeah, she feels pleasure.
Transformative, which is where I'm going with this. Is like, is there a magical element to any of these others? Like, do the temple sex workers and temple warriors, do they have any sort of fire magic applied to them as part of their ascension to this order, or part of their, I don't know, do they? Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities here. A lot of unsettled world building that is very cool to think about. If anyone's running role-playing campaigns, you've got a lot to work with here, but you'd have to make some decisions because it's not all definitive.
Yeah, I guess, Richard Seymour says in the chat right now, he's like, do red priests / priestesses have the power of glamour, or is that a Shadowbinder thing? Which I think that really gets the crux of it, is that we don't know where Melisandre gets her powers from completely.
She says it's a gift from the Lord of Light. The glamour, because it's bending of light.
But like, it's unclear too whether that, like, I mean, like, shadow binding can be part of a gift from the Lord of Light. Like, that's just, you know, a red priest can be a shadow binder or not.
Yeah, and because Ashai is apparently where the religion, where the prophecy of Azor Ahai emerged, which isn't necessarily where Relorism emerged, but
do we think there are shadow binders that aren't?
Yeah, I believe there are shadow binders that aren't red priests. And there are red priests that aren't shadowbinders. Yeah. I think so, yeah. But I do think there's a lot of overlap because there's a temple in Ashai, and Ashai is by the shadow, and the legend of the myth of Azor, legend / myth of Azor Ahai comes from Ashai, and they believe in that. So yeah, there's got to be a ton of overlap. In our Ashai episode, we guessed, just as a random headcanon, like, you're not a real red priest unless you've made a pilgrimage to Ashai. You know, it's like in Islam, you make a pilgrimage to Mecca. You know, you gotta go to Ashai to see where it all began, you know. But I'm just making that up. I don't know that that's a thing. It would be cool if it was, though. It would make some kind of sense. Mora also asked, do we think what did Makoro mean when he told Tyrion's dragons old and young, true and false, bright and dark, and you a small man with a big shadow snarling in the midst of it all? Was he talking about the eventual confrontation between Dany and Fagon? I think that and more. That primarily, but also potentially Jon and maybe a few others here and there, and maybe Euron if the dragons themselves, if he takes one of them and the actual dragons fight each other, or if there's an ice dragon or an undead dragon, yeah. But that's it, basically, Mara. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I think Makoro means Tyrion is in the midst of it all. He's already been in the midst of the Aegon Young Griff stuff. He's heading towards Tyrion with Makoro. Makoro's going to tell all this stuff to Dany and be like, I'm going to win you over and tell you that you're Azor Ahai and show you my real powers. And yeah, who knows how that's going to go, but I can't wait.
Am I remembering correct that Tyrion took that as him just building him up? He's just manipulating me.
A little bit, yeah. Telling him how big you are. So, yes, you standing tall in the midst of it all. Like, oh, me?
Tyrion, like, tries to downplay. It's like, oh, maybe you were mixing me up with Penny. You know, like,
yeah, no. Tyrion's like, this is a pretty standard, like, psychic's trick, is to, a fortune teller's trick is to, like, play me up. Yeah, play up my importance.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. But he might be telling the truth. It's like, well, we kind of do think Tyrion's going to be important. Maybe not quite as important as Makoro says. Okay, let's go back in history. We don't have a lot of history on R'hllor. It's very much in shadow, which, hey, that's how they would want it. Best we can tell, like I just said, was it emerged in Ashai. But even that's uncertain, because what we do know is, like I said, the Azor Ahai Lightbringer prophecy came from Ashai, which doesn't mean R'hllorism did. But the two are connected, so it's our best guess that that's where it, like, took root first. But it could predate R'hllor worship, or the other way around. Like, the Azor Ahai prophecy could have come first, Relorism could have been founded around it, or it could have been added on to an existing thing. Some sort of meeting of the religions in some ancient past.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about like Christianity, for example, we could consider that before Azor Ahai, R'hllor was like Judaism, and then it became very much a Christianity. With the New Testament and all that. It's kind of how I think of it. That I feel like maybe it did exist before their Messiah.
And there had to be fire gods. That's the other thing is
Yeah.
who? It's one of the most basic elemental things. So it's kind of hard to imagine there wasn't. Maybe they didn't call it Relorism,
yeah.
But there was fire worship probably
They called it
before.
Red Lordism.
Yeah. So, given that Ashai is, quote, by the shadow, and the Shadowlands are the name of that region, again, that's another connection, right? It's the god of flame and shadow. That's his thing. Like, that connection is right there. Ashai by the shadow, god of light and shadow. So, in terms of human nature, the pattern of deifying the elements, if you lived by the shadow, that would be incorporated into your conception of the world, right? And all that. So if shadow was a part of your environment, you'd have a god of shadows or a god of something and shadows like this. So yeah, fits pretty well. But yeah, I hope we get more on the history of this religion. Maybe there will be at least one more Melisandre chapter, and probably more than one, but at least one more. And that's an opportunity for more religion. I mean, remember, George originally was going to have Dany go to Ashai. So there was, presumably that's for some lore, for some learning about her own past, maybe her own connection to the Azor Ahai myth.
Yeah, and then he decided to not have her go to Ashai and wrote Melisandre as a POV because probably, like you say, he was like, I need to get this lore here somewhere. Where can I do that?
Yeah.
It's something I remember wondering if I would find like the first priest of R'hllor, or if R'hllor had a Pope type figure or anything like that, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So.
Yeah. You know what, Sean? You should never give a worshiper of the Lord of Light an ultimatum, because they'll just say, R'hllor what? That wasn't funny.
Like,
it may not be represented everywhere, but it's
I just got or what?
R'hllor what?
I just got or what?
Yeah.
Or what? I was just like, what's the pun there? I just couldn't quite grasp the pun. Or what?
That's why it wasn't a good joke. But making fun of myself afterwards, I always have that to fall back on. See, if the joke flops, you can always just make fun of yourself. That's the secret to telling dad jokes. Just be willing to make fun of yourself and you're good. It may not be represented everywhere, but the Red God seems to be perhaps more widespread than any religion in the world. I'm not sure. I definitely can't name one that's more prominent. Like the Seven doesn't exist in Essos at all, or does very little. The old gods don't either. And what else is there? Like the gods of Lys, the Jogos Nye, the Moon Singers. Like those aren't huge worldwide religions. They're just pretty big in their own regions. So like Noth, I don't know that they're in Noth at all. I don't know that they're in the Summer Isles at all, but they might be. The Summer Isles, there's a good chance there's some temples there because there's such a big sailing culture, and we know that there's a lot of R'hllor worship spots in ports. Yi though, yeah, decent chance. I mean, with Ashai and Valyria like sandwiching Yi, it seems like they didn't just skip over. Just like we presume there's got to be some dragons in Yi and all that. They didn't skip the region entirely. There's probably some R'hllor worshippers there too, or maybe there's a different fire god there. Karth, same deal. Karth has been around a long time. They probably have a long relationship with R'hllor as well. Here's where we get to play around a little, imagine some stuff.
Real quick,
Yeah,
I'm gonna call it now. Karth definitely has R'hllor. George just didn't talk about it because it was via Dany, and he was trying to keep it removed.
Keep that off the page. Yeah, good. Yeah. Very good point. You're right. That does line up really well with what I was saying before. Well point, Sean. So we wonder what some of the other regional cultures thought of R'hllor back in the day. Like, what did the Rhoynar think? They probably weren't big fans, being that they were a water river culture. That was their source of magic. Not so sure. And then the Valyrians come along with all their fire, and they end up being enemies of them. Yeah, it doesn't... Thematically, that seems in pretty straight opposition. But the Rhoynar were also, at least before their conflict with Valyria, they were very open and welcoming to other peoples and religions. So maybe they were open to that. On the other hand, R'hllor isn't very open to other people, so they may have been like, we let you in and you're going to behave like this? Get the heck out of here. You're trying to say no gods except yours? Well, no. That doesn't work in this environment. But pure speculation there. It's certainly it had to come up, though. The Rhoynar people dealt with R'hllorists, no doubt, one way or another. The Andals, again. Let's take Nina's one on this. She says, I could see the Andals strongly rejecting R'hllorism, not just as a different religion, but one which promotes such a strong duality in its theology. The faith of the Seven really has no duality about it, certainly not from our limited knowledge of its teachings. This religion acknowledges that sin exists and teaches that hell exists for the sinful, but there is no Satan or devil figure to war against. The Seven who are one, certainly outside of local tradition, like we see with the briefly named Lord of the Seven Hells. There is also no eschatology that we know of with the faith of the Seven if the faithful believe in a specific end of the world scenario. There's nothing like an apocalypse or like a Jesus returning to Earth kind of thing. The Seven doesn't have that kind of thing that we know of. And we do know a lot more about the Seven than R'hllor. So there's less wiggle room for something this big to just be missing from our knowledge. So I would say it would be a little cheap to introduce a apocalyptic figure from the Seven like that at this point when we've seen so much and it's never come up. Maybe George could probably do it, could make it work because he's so skilled. But my imagining of it was it's too late for that.
Sam could discover some hidden book.
Yeah, maybe they used
library.
to believe that. That could work. Yeah, that used to be a thing. We know the Andals are/were against slavery, and a number of Valyrian ideals are very much in opposition to each other. Like Andal ideals and Valyrian ideals, a lot of them are polar opposites, and we got to think that a lot of that is cultural response to a powerful, oppressive nation that was constantly nipping at their borders and enslaving their people. And as we've said, many Valyrian ideals overlap with R'hllorist ideals. We introduced this concept earlier in the episode. Let's get a little deeper with it. The R'hllor worshippers were unhappy with the religious freedom given in the Freehold. And again, let's remind ourselves of this poor fit that R'hllor is for the nobility in terms of them personally adopting it because of the whole slavery thing, the reduction of power, the reduction of corruption, and things like that. Let's go with Nina's take on this one again. She wonders what the extent the Rhoynar and others conflated R'hllor worship with the Valyrians in the same thing. Like, they probably weren't big on fire and magic that's opposed to the water magic, but what did they think of these two things? We wonder about the Valyrian connection to R'hllor, and we wonder what that perspective looks like on the outside to other nations. How did they perceive the connection between R'hllor and Valyrian gods and dragons and concepts like fire made flesh and 14 active volcanoes, which clearly implies a lot of elemental strength and power. And if you believe in nature worship, which if you're worshiping water, you probably think volcanoes have some real place in the pantheon of elemental power. So it's a fascinating bit of imaginative energy that we can expend on this and think about what it could have been like. Without, of course, we don't have answers, but it is the kind of imagination that I really enjoy about this setting because the detail supports. It gives us just enough to think about it while leaving it open for a number of possibilities, while also giving us a little hope that it'll be explored further in the future.
The region that we would call the Rhoynar, the region where that people or culture was.
Yeah.
How far was it from the volcanoes of?
Not far. Not far at all. It was like if you go west from Valyria, the first city you get to is Volantis. Volantis is on the Rhoyne. So yeah, it's
like as far as from King's Landing to Sunspear.
The Vale, no less. The Vale probably. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It's not far at all. The Rhoyne is huge. Of course, it's the biggest river in the world. So like if you go to the full length of the Rhoyne is probably 2/3 the length of Westeros.
But yeah, so I guess the Rhoyne would be polluted by that, but it's also upriver, so I guess it would be less polluted than other areas.
So big, yeah.
You know, like I wouldn't, it wouldn't travel up.
Yeah, the pollution would mostly go out into the sea from Volantis.
It would go out. Yeah, exactly. I'd go south down to. I wonder how much the Summer Isles got any of that. Like how much. I wonder how the currents go. Like how much like ash in the water, and like they're like, wow, and the water's dirty.
Yeah, you wonder.
Well, I think that would enrich the water. It would enrich the.
Yeah,
in the long term.
I don't know
yeah.
for sure,
Short
but
term,
yeah,
probably,
yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
you're right
I
about
don't know.
that.
Anyway, so
I was asking a question, sorry, because I was wondering if it was far or close enough, how aware they would be of the volcanoes. If volcanoes would be something that the average person, it would just be some myth from some faraway land, or something that they knew was real and
they could probably
that might affect
see. You
how-
could travel within sight of it probably and see some of them without
Yeah.
getting like all the way there.
and they at least would have heard stories from believable sources. So
yeah. And continuing on this line of thought, like Bonero says, Daenerys' dragons, quote, have come to carry her to glory as the new Azor Ahai reborn. The dragons prove that, which is what Aemon says, the dragons prove that she is this heroic prophesied figure. And so what did the R'hllorite followers see of the doom? Did they see it as a punishment? The R'hllor wasn't made the only religion there, and it's the revenge of his punishment towards the Valyrians to destroy with fire? Like, how is a R'hllor worshiper not going to see that as the punishment of their god? Right? A big apocalypse of fire and an explosion. Like, yeah, how could you not see it that way if you worship R'hllor? So do they think of the doom as that? Like, this is the revenge of R'hllor. They did something wrong. The Valyrians did whatever it was they did wrong. Probably not putting R'hllor over the other gods, probably worshiping other gods, stuff like that. I'm not sure. Maybe not submitting to R'hllor, the nobility being so powerful and not submitting themselves as slaves. There's a lot of different reasons they could probably point to and be like, it was this, it was that, it was the other. Plenty of ammunition for blaming the Valyrians for their own behavior as being anti-R'hllor. Tisk tisk. Of course, they claim the comet. Obviously, they claim the comet as a sign of R'hllor. But heck, even Theon claimed the comet. I mean, everyone thought the comet was about them. But the R'hllorists, of course, like they're one of the most obvious. Yeah, it's a fire. It's fire. Of course, it's our god sending that. So there's just not much history of the Red Priests of R'hllor, of Red Temples in Westeros at all. There's very little about it in the world of Ice and Fire, which is interesting considering how big of a topic it is and how big it's set to be important going forward. It's pretty much not in Fire and Blood at all, or Dunk and Egg at all. Very little, and that's really interesting to me too, because George has taken the opportunity with those books to expand on a number of topics, but he didn't choose to expand on this because maybe it's already been expanded on enough, or he didn't want to expand it on there, or there wasn't a good way to fit it in because there was no R'hllor presence in King's Landing or in Westeros in general in that era. So like
it adds to the idea that it's grown over time.
Yes. Good point. Yeah. So, so a lot to see there, a lot to think about. Let's talk about some of the specific Red Temples and make a couple comparisons. Regarding the free cities, this is what is said in the world of Ice and Fire about the presence of Red Temples.
Each city has its own customs and histories. Each has its own gods too. Although the Red Priesthood of R'hllor holds sway in all of them and often wields considerable power.
And they're just talking political power in that sense, but they also just wield considerable power elsewhere through, unity, zealotry, just numbers. They have a lot of people. Real magic backs all that up, though, which is when we're wondering why this religion has survived for so long, it's probably a part of it. The fact that it's got some internal protection against corruption, not fully, but some, based on the level of dedication that's necessary and other factors. But the magic, I think, beyond everything else, is the thing that has real power, allows it to sustain itself, I think, more so than perhaps anything else. Other places we've seen temples, I've mentioned before, like Old Town in Pentos and Dorne. We've also seen them in Saloris and Lys and Myr. But let's take the two most extreme examples, Volantis and Braavos. And the reason those are extreme examples is because they're so opposite ends in terms of their own government and politics within their own cities. You have a question, Sean?
It's something I've been kind of pondering, and I finally want to bring it up, and it might even relate a little bit to what you're about to talk about.
Cool.
Think about in the real world how religions typically have a lot of splintering.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we got the ability to print the Bible and spread it around, there's still Lutherans and Methodists and Catholics and even the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity are all rooted in the same thing, but kind of branch off, and they continue to branch even farther and farther. Do you think there's a million different little subsets of R'hllor that we're just not exposed to, George hasn't gotten into? Or do you think it is? Does it maintain a certain integrity? It seems to me like it should splinter off a lot when it's in different cultures and regions, islands, spread out over a longer time than Christianity also, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem clear if that is the case. I wonder if something that holds it together, especially because we haven't even heard word of like a pope, which can like send out edicts or directives for what should be studied or followed or believed. Maybe it's all in the flames.
Could be,
Maybe they keep a certain consistency because flames all around present the same images or messages.
I think if you're able to communicate with the people, practicing island R'hllorism, then things are not going to get as splintered than they would if you were completely cut off. Versus, so
maybe they used glass candles, or still do. Maybe glass candles allow that kind of communication.
And that makes a lot of sense too, because the fire, the flame.
It's a similar the idea of that power concentrated into a obsidian, which is frozen fire. Like you just have a flame reading. Well, this is like a more concentrated version of that if it's a obsidian tool that's imbued with magic. But you're right. This is a good segue to what we're going to talk about. So Volantis and Bravo, it can't possibly work the same given the laws about slavery. Like how can you have 1,000 slave soldiers in Bravos? Like that just doesn't fly there. So there has to be some differences. We haven't been exposed to them. There are, there's got to be exceptions.
Bravos just gives them an exception.
Yeah, Bravos is like, you pay us enough money, we'll let you get away with that. But like, there are ways to get around that. I mean, slavery is illegal in Westeros, yet there's thraldom in the Iron Islands. So like, maybe they just have to. There might be loopholes. So
rebranding.
Yeah, rebranding.
Unintended.
Maybe they're like, oh, if you're an adult, you can do that. Maybe they're not. They can't. You can't call them slaves. Maybe it's not slavery by the definition of Bravos. Like for example, in Bravos, slaves are almost set free. Remember the example of the slave ship from Least that took some free folk and couldn't make it back and had to go to Bravos, and Arya tells them about it, and next thing you know, they've all been set free. And because they don't tolerate that. In Volantis, it's illegal to set slaves free. So it's like the opposite. You must set them free in Bravos. You can't set them free in Volantis. There's very few exceptions to either of those, but there are exceptions.
I mean, maybe they just send the most passionate devotees to Bravos, the ones who are willing.
Only adults, don't send the kids.
But only adults who aren't going to run, who you're like, oh no, they're true believers.
Yeah.
Like there's no chance. Like, technically they're set free, but they're just believers who are never going to leave.
Yeah, there's a lot of industries that children are involved in from a young age as apprentices, but it's basically they're kind of stuck. Like they can leave, but it's the only job they know how to do. Like Gendry. What's Gendry going to do besides be a blacksmith? Right? Like maybe he could be the Lord of Storm's End, but other than that,
other than the top job.
Maybe that's not the best.
Yeah, that may not have been the
best.
best.
What's Hot Pie going to do if he can't bake?
Okay, that's a good example. Hot Pie won't be the king or lord of anything except the bread and the tasty pies, which is a good place for him. I would like a sampling, actually. It sounds pretty good right now.
That said, even Hot Pie doesn't feel like he's a slave. He doesn't feel like he wants to do it. He enjoys doing it. He's probably getting paid to do it, on and on.
Well, I guess that's my question here. Just to cut you off, Sean, is if Hot Pie is made a slave of R'hllor, he's kidnapped and made a slave, but they put him to work in the kitchens, and his job is doing what he's passionate about. Then they're like, well, he's happy enough, so they send him to Bravos. Maybe he stays in the kitchens at their,
It's the semantics of having a choice that you wouldn't make. Like, would you, do you want to have a choice? You want to have choice, but if it's a choice you wouldn't make, you miss it a little less than. You still want the choice. Don't get me wrong, but you're right. Like that is an example. Like if someone,
he might still leave when they send him to Bravos because he's like, well, I would like to work for myself as a chef. You know, like he might still leave even if he likes his
prefer it.
job of baking. You know
He's
what
like,
I mean?
if I go somewhere else, maybe I won't be able to bake. You know, and he's like, I'd rather not risk that. And they treat me well, even though I'm a slave and I can't leave. But other than that, I'm treated well. Like, yeah, every night they send me one of the temple sex workers. And I get to eat as much of my own bread as I want. Like, it sucks that I can't leave, but honestly, I don't think I could get better elsewhere. Yeah, it is weird. Like, and that gets to what Tyrion said. One of the most insidious things about bondage is that how easy it is to get used to it. And Tyrion's a highborn noble, so to him it's extremely like, oh no, I would never do that. But he hasn't faced the reality that non-sons of Casterly Rock have faced out in the world. Like, no, you might sacrifice a little security for safety if you're not Tyrion Lannister. We can't make that choice for other people.
We've even touched in the past on the idea that the word slavery itself can carry a lot of different meanings. Like whether it's legal meanings, moral meanings, psychological meanings, on and on. And to me, it's not that much of a stretch to see how Bravos could justify it.
Like
whether they're like barely justifying it for the sake of some financial gain, or if it's easily justifiable because it's a semantic thing and they're not really slaves at all. You know?
Like another example, and I think maybe I think we've mentioned them before, is like the Silent Sisters. Like, I don't think you can leave the Silent Sisters. Like, is that pretty much like religious slavery? Like, you're sent to this
I always consider
religious
it like
order,
that. You're
and
right.
you can't leave, as far as we know, and you can't even talk about leaving because they literally cut your tongue out or whatever. Or
other people will be like, well, is the Night's Watch slavery then? I guess
it kind of is. That's it's also prison though. Like,
you technically have the choice of death.
In some scenarios, you forego your liberty. You know, if you define slavery as the losing your liberty.
I mean, I guess a lot of people say prison is slavery, and and in that sense as well.
If they're forcing you to work for someone else's benefit, then it does become kind of like that.
I'm like you're right. I guess some prisons aren't slavery because you're not working; you're just in prison. You're literally just in prison, so there is no slave aspect of it.
But if they're forcing you to fight fires for $1 an hour, that's
slavery.
That's slavery. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I guess I guess that could be. I guess the Night's Watch is then.
It kind of is. Yeah, I would agree. Even though, but it's weird because you can voluntarily join. Like, no one voluntarily goes to prison, but still, like, I don't know. It's a weird. It's hard to compare to the.
You're right. You're right. You are right. That people do choose to join the Night's Watch.
Yeah.
There's that.
I guess if you take that oath, you can't unjoin though. Which is weird, but that's true for a lot of things. Like a lot of oaths.
I mean, technically, the Kingsguard is like that too.
Yeah.
And
like in the U.S., if you join the army, you take an oath, and if you can be put in jail. Like, if you abandon your post, if you quit, like, I don't like this anymore. I don't like my sergeant. You just leave. You're AWOL. Come arrest you and put you on trial. But
that we wouldn't call slavery because no one's forced. On the draft, you might. Under a draft, you might.
Mm-hmm.
But not like you joined the army voluntarily. You could say that like you came up in a military culture and you were maybe encouraged to. You weren't forced into it, but.
Also, one way or the other, you're paid when you're in the army.
Right, that's true too. So,
I
don't know if you're paid in a Night's Watch. I don't know if you're paid to be a priest of R'hllor.
Well, they don't have spending money, but they get food and they get their.
And I mean, technically, sometimes you're paid a little bit, but you have no opportunity to spend it on anything. You have no access to anything. It doesn't matter if you're paid or you're paid so little that it means nothing, and you might as well not be being paid, as in like the case of prison. So. I wonder. I feel like I wonder if they get any sort of stipends. Like in our Hot Pie situation, Hot Pie the baker at the Bravosi Temple. Like, does he ever get a little pittance to like go buy himself a treat? Probably not. I don't think, and that sucks. So like but I think maybe he does.
Yeah.
Say he wasn't given a pittance to go buy himself a treat. However, he was given a 4-bedroom house with 3 servants to clean, and he has, how many
he could probably sell some
amenities
of the stuff
could you be given that would be worth more than he could have gotten if they did pay him? Like, we'll pay you $10 an hour, or give you a new house. I think the house is more valuable. You don't even pay me. Could you complain about not being paid after that?
We're getting into some pretty out there examples there, aren't we?
Of our Hot Pie AU world, where we went to Essos.
We gotta write this Hot Pie fanfic here. The alternate, the alternate adventures of Hot Pie. All right, let's quote this Volantis example to set up our comparison with Bravos. Here we go.
But I'm not sure where we are, by the way.
Shay's got
It's
this one.
mine, anyways. Many of the old blood of Volantis still keep the old gods of Valyria, but their faith is found primarily within the Black Walls. Without, the red god R'hllor is favored by many, especially among the slaves and freedmen of the city. The temple of the Lord of Light in Volantis is said to be the greatest in all the world. In Remnants of the Dragon Lords, Archmaester Grammarian claims that it is fully 3 times larger than the Great Sept of Baelor. All who serve within this mighty temple are slaves, bought as children and trained to become priests, temple prostitutes, or warriors. These wear the flames of their fiery god as tattoos upon their faces. Of the warriors, little enough is said, though they are called the Fiery Hand, and they never number more or less than 1,000 members.
1,000 members.
I wonder if there's ever been a high priest R'hllor, whoever has made some sort of joke or pun or anything about getting someone with their slapping him with the fiery hand, how much wordplay has been done about the fiery hand, punch of it.
The Unsullied have 8,000 people, but they don't have 8,000 members. Yeah, there's a different use for your fiery hand. So Tyrion also thinks it's 3 times larger. That's 2 different estimates that this temple is 3 times larger than the Great Sept of Baelor.
I'm happy George held back. Easily he could have said 10 times larger or 5 times larger.
So again, we wonder, where did all this money come from? Where did the money to build this giant church come from? Maybe the temple sex workers are really bringing in the cash. Who knows? Maybe some politicians give them some money to keep them in line. Maybe the other way around.
In terms of sacrifices and donations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's just a pretty although a lot of it would just go to the flame, but maybe not everything goes to the flames, and they get a lot of gold or something. It just gets melted down.
Yeah, it's possible that not all of them, that is, the slavery business hasn't always been the way it's functioned. It hasn't always been, you're not always slaves to the temple, especially given that we wonder if that's even how it works in Braavos at all. For the Braavos Red Temple, that could explain, and that could work in with what you're saying, Sean, about permutations of how it all works. Take Bonero, who is hardcore preaching flame and doom and pushing glyphs into the air with magic, fiery glyphs that glowing in the air, compared to the Red Priest, quote, fatter than Illyrio at Dany's wedding, who was probably not so hardcore. He's probably more the corrupted, pay me some money type, that guy probably isn't devout. He could be, but usually being that big is a sign that you're all about the pleasures of life and not about the the worship of and thinking about prophecies and things like that.
A couple things. One, over enough time, a structure like that wouldn't necessarily take a bunch of money if it was built up over a long time. There might not have been any one moment where an extravagant amount of money was spent.
That's a good point.
Also, in the same ways that we wonder, maybe it wasn't always slave-based. Maybe in the past it was even more slave-based.
Yeah, maybe they had to dial it back. Now, here's where one of the loopholes might be. Who are you actually a slave to? The temple. That's a thing. You're a slave to a god, right? Which is different than a slave to another person. You're not owned by a person. You're owned by an organization, which apparently doesn't even have a leader. There is no pope, as we've said, that we know of. So maybe that's how Braavos can tolerate it, because you're not enslaved to a person. There's no slave owner.
You're religious slavery is fine.
Yeah,
just not,
maybe that's
people.
the loophole.
If they told the person running the Church of Braavos, the R'hllor Temple of Braavos, you can't have any slaves. I don't have any slaves.
Yeah, they're not my slaves. Yeah, wipe your hands clean. I didn't buy them. The temple paid for them.
What else? Are we done here?
Where's the receipt? I don't have the bill of sale. It's this. Yeah, it's right here.
It's
corporations.
corporations.
Yeah, they're
I'm a corporation. I get the rights of people, but none of the,
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of like
the obligations of being a person, because I'm not a person. I'm a corporate. Yeah, that's what it is.
Gray area here, a red area.
Yeah.
But you also could see how if people who worship R'hllor think of themselves as slaves to R'hllor.
Yeah.
When there is an operation, they might not have to be, priests with whips forcing everyone into the construction effort. They might just choose to do it because they believe in R'hllor.
They might be like,
let's
okay,
build this temple.
They might be like the Bravos rules. Might be like, okay, no chains, no whips, no bondage, none of these things. Then you can get away with it. Because let's say they're like, no, this is a semantic argument that we don't accept. You're the head priest. These are your slaves. Like, no, I'm a slave too. I was bought as a child. Like, can a slave own slaves? I don't think
so. Just to be clear, I
maybe,
think so.
Yeah, I guess so. But it gets into another weird semantic version of this. Like, this is a rabbit hole we haven't gone into before.
If my Neopet can have a pet, then I think a slave can have a slave. I guess they call it.
So yeah, but however you frame it, it is different than having a master, right? That you call yourself a slave, but you don't actually have a master. Are you really a slave? I mean, they call themselves slaves, so yeah, I guess so. But like, I think a thrall is more of a slave than this version because there's no person like telling them what to do. They're a slave to a deity that doesn't actually tell them what to do. Now, in the actual day to day, maybe the temple priests are giving them orders and telling them all these things to do and behaving corruptly. We haven't seen all the red temples. We've only seen the Volantis one up close. We talk about the Bravos one, but we haven't actually gotten a close look at it. We've got a quote on it coming in a second, but yeah. We know a lot more about this one, and it's tempting to take this version as the way they all work. But we know that can't be the case. It's the biggest one. It's the one with the most slaves in the town. We know Bravos has different laws, so even though we don't have the answers, we have to imagine that there are some pretty substantial differences. Nina has another point here, right? And that this might increase the appeal of the religion to people who are slaves. The fact that even the high priests are slaves too might be like, hey, there's a little more quality here that might appeal. It might seem like there's less corruption going on because they're all at least somewhat on the same level, at least as far as that title goes. They're all slaves to R'hllor. They may have different social standing, but when in his eyes they're equal, maybe something like that. It goes a long way towards explaining how this religion has survived, how the power of the people has been used in a manner kind of concentrated in a way that makes it difficult for the nobility to break it up, which is what the nobility usually does to power centers that they don't have control over. This one's just too strong for them and too big and been around too long. So, but we know they want to get rid of it. That's also part of the Outlook section coming up later. We'll talk about that in a minute. What do you think about this, Sean? What do you think when they're this hardcore? Do you think that that's more appealing to the rank and file because it shows that the people at the top aren't corrupt? Or do you think that that's all just kind of lost in the wash? How cynical about this are you?
I really just think it depends on how the individuals behave. I think that it could be like if you have a leader, a priest of R'hllor who is, I'm going to say this, genuine, kind, even if they're strict, even if they're a slave, and if they employ slaves, but if they still seem to really believe in this God, and by the way, really have powers that come from this God, I can see the average person being okay with it, or at least is okay with it as the rich kid who's just in charge because of his dad, who's trying to tax my wheat, where this guy just wants people to believe in his God, and, and everyone it does seems to be okay with it. Like they might have been a slave, but they're not leaving. Yeah. And if they don't have to use whips and chains to keep them there, like, I don't know, they might not even be perceived, but I can easily see a priest of R'hllor using whips and chains and going to the local rich kid who's only in charge because of his dad to get his help recruiting more slaves into his church. And I think it really depends as much about the details of how the individuals behave than the theoretical structure of the church. But as you said, it does make sense that this theoretical structure is going to do more to endear itself, is going to do a lot to endear itself to the average person.
Well, and the other thing is where the nobility can't harm them or has a difficulty making inroads in tamping down their power is that they're both working within the same slavery system. If R'hllor's temples are buying people as kids and then training them and raising them to do all these different jobs, well, they're buying them at the same slave markets that the nobles are buying slaves for their households. And so to break up one breaks up both. And so this is part of it. They're buying you've had an endless supply of new worshipers if you're indoctrinating them, buying them as babies, and then just raising them to do that. Like, they've known no other existence. Sure, we have adult converts, like the Brotherhood Without Banners, but we have to keep in mind that a huge percentage of R'hllor worshippers come straight from the slave pens. They're raised there, they're born there, and, well, it's the religion that gives them the best shot. Yes, you're a slave, but compare it. Here's a great point by Nina. R'hllorism simultaneously gives the enslaved people of Volantis an immediate comfort in opposition to their slavers and the promise of future redemption. Compare being enslaved by a Valyrian dragon lord sent down into the mines, or just bringing them someone food every day, or just at their whim, versus being enslaved to a temple and serving a god, right? Which is who doesn't give you direct orders. It's a very different form of slavery. One's telling you that when it's all over, you're going to be reborn and have eternal life. The Valyrians aren't promising you crap. They're just like, nah, you got to do what I say or I hurt you. End of story. Right? So, of course, they're going to prefer the former to the latter. Like, maybe they don't like either of them, but the former's way better from the common
Here's
perspective.
a couple connected questions.
Sure.
Is there any sort of celibacy involved with R'hllor?
We don't know.
Can you still get married and have kids?
Don't know. Definitely don't know. You can still have shadow babies, clearly.
Yeah,
but
like I don't
know.
I don't remember anything of that being noted where we do know that for like the Wall or the King's Guard, different entities, it is pointed out often when that's the case, and has been pointed out here. It doesn't seem to be something like if Melisandre's just trying to convert everyone, there's opposition, but no one has named that as part of their opposition, right? So I'm inclined to think that's not the case.
Well, she's trying to be clear. Converting someone isn't making them a priest that would potentially be celibate. Being a worshiper or a slave, being a worshiper is different from a slave, is different from a priest, and they can all be the same thing. But
Thoros certainly not celibate. Like that dude was a womanizer. Melisandre too old either to like have regular children.
But you could be not celibate and still not able to get married.
Yeah. That's true.
Like,
but is every member of the church a slave? Do some people who weren't bought as kids maybe consider themselves slaves to R'hllor?
Yeah, maybe not. Like, I don't think the BWB consider themselves slaves to R'hllor, for example.
Yeah, there you go.
They just worship R'hllor. Yeah, I don't think Thoros doesn't call himself. He calls himself a humble servant. He doesn't say slave. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Even though he's a priest,
I feel like
he's from Mir, and he specifically was given to the Red Temple as a.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. It makes sense that there would be a lot of people who are like, I can't raise my son. I'm poor. I'm this. I'm that.
He was the youngest of 6.
So they're like, we'll give one to the church, which is a normal thing to do in real world. That they would donate a child to the church or something like that.
That's kind of where I'm going. Is I wonder do we know how many slaves of R'hllor are bought at markets? What if a high percent at least of the slaves of R'hllor that are bought are just a family who is already a slave to a temple, has a kid, and then the church is like, you know what,
we'll take your kid.
We're going to give you 20 gold pieces for your kid and use that to improve your house, and your kid can still live there. Just be part of the church and clean the aisles.
It would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Yeah.
It's not really, it's barely even slavery. I can see how semantically in certain ways they're like obliged to do what the church says, but they want to do what the church says anyway, kind of like forcing hot pie to bake.
Right, like it's a fair exchange, basically. Like I'm getting a lot for my labor. It's,
they're helping the family out, even if they're justifying it in their minds, or maybe it's still not right. But my point is, you can see how the system they have might not entail all the terrible, evil things that we automatically associate with slavery. It might be handled in a different way, at least in some areas by some leaders, that makes everyone feel better, be more voluntary. Bravos accepts it, etc.
Yeah, that could work. Yeah, I would see that. I could see that because that is religion has to bend to the culture that it's fitting in as much as it tries to bend the people that it's trying to adapt to. So there's definitely some of both. When you have slaves, it's a lot more of the you listen to me. But when you are in a region that is anti-slavery, you have to do more of the like, hey, this is why you should come to us. You have to like win them over rather than just buy them as children, because they obviously can't buy them as children in Bravos.
What if it's like a Schindler's List type thing too? Like the only slaves they buy are the ones that were about to be sent. We know that slaver is going to send them down into the mines. We'll buy them and bring them into our church. So like rescuing people,
like that's what the Atlanta Aquarium did with whale sharks. Some people, there was like people that protest the whale sharks being held in this aquarium, but those whale sharks were saved from slaughter. The government of Thailand had the right, through negotiation, like world ecology organizations have gotten them to reduce the number of whale sharks they'll kill. Each year it's gone down by 2. I think we might even be in the point where they no longer kill whale sharks. But there were like the Atlanta Aquarium bought 4 kills from, it's like, okay, Thailand, you're allowed to kill 14 whale sharks this year. We'll buy 4 of those from you and not kill them and just keep them. And then Thailand's like, done. Give us that money. Yeah. So you're right that sometimes you look at something in a vacuum and it looks terrible, but then you realize, then if you look at the full picture, it's like, well, the alternative is worse. Well, yeah. So,
but a lot of this, we're speculating, but I imagine some of this will come into play with Dany when she's trying to stop slavery, and R'hllor's going to be this thing. I think it's going to be dealt with. I bet it gets further explained. And
she can't just get all these R'hllor worshippers to stop worshiping R'hllor, and why would she want to? Yeah. She's not the kind of person that just like, I will decide who you worship. Like, it's not really her bag. Yeah. That's not her attitude. So you're right. She's going to have to reckon with their beliefs.
Dany demands that R'hllor release all the slaves, and they're like, "Okay, you're all released." And like, "Okay, we'll see you tomorrow."
Yeah,
like nothing might change.
Like, sure, because they might be like, "Yeah, well, we're following you. You're the prophet you're the prophesied hero. So yeah, whatever you say, they're gonna follow you anyway. You free them, they're still gonna follow you no matter where you go. You're the savior."
Well, what I'm supposing, I mean, that's true, but I'm supposing that even if they were freed, they might not change anything.
Right, they still might just go doing what they're like. Yeah. Doesn't make. I'm not gonna exercise that choice. You've given me the choice, and I'm not gonna exercise it. Yeah, I mean that's
in the same way that Dany freed the Unsullied, and they just stayed with her anyway.
Yeah.
If R'hllor freed their slaves, they might just stay with them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, very similar, and I think that is probably not unlikely. I think that they will stick with her, and they have as much reason, if not more reason, to stick with her than the Unsullied do. Okay, so here's the quote, much shorter quote than the one about Volantis. The quote about the Red Temple in Braavos.
The Lord of Light, Red R'hllor, has a great temple on Braavos as well, where his worshippers have grown ever more numerous in the past 100 years. And we've brought this up a few times. I'm wondering why, one, what can we attribute this growth to? And we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but also we ended up touching on this is that growth in general or just there in Braavos or both? Or
It's interesting. Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, I my interpretation is that R'hllor worshippers have grown more numerous in the past 100 years, and that extends to Braavos. That's not them saying that only in Braavos have they grown more numerous.
I agree with that. Yeah.
I think I agree with that, but I one way or the other, I think it's worth noting this is Eandel's perspective.
Yes, true.
And so even he has this perspective who might be.
No, that's not Eandel's perspective. That's not Eandel's perspective.
Oh, is it not?
No, that is someone talking to Arya.
Oh, my bad. I thought that was from World of Ice and Fire.
I think it is. I'm pretty sure. No, actually, you might be right. No, you're right. This is World of Ice and Fire. There's a different quote from Arya later. So cut that. Okay. You were right. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think it could be a rise in slavery. I mean, this is maybe one of the more simple answers is if there's more slaves in the world and R'hlorism is popular with slaves, then that could be why. Or it could just be like a surge in, political power, different things. Yeah, it's pure guesswork though. I don't have a
recruitment efforts.
Yeah, I don't have a solid answer for that.
We know Eandel.
Population's multiplying.
We know Eandel, like he might have witnessed the founding of the Red Temple in Old Town. Like maybe it didn't exist, but in the last 100 years it was founded. Like maybe that's part of why it's more numerous to him is that they had, these temples are new because we know there's one in Old Town and that's where Maester Eandel, studied. So like he would have been exposed to it if it existed there when he studied, and it probably did exist or was founded at that time.
Yeah. So we just have to assume that there's some sort of semantic arrangement or loophole that allows this to work that way, or maybe just the temple in Braavos has to work differently. It has to be volunteers. Like one of the other things to think about is like in Volantis, they have facial tattoos to indicate they're a slave. Clearly that's not the way it is everywhere, but I mean, Melisandre doesn't have face tattoos. She's not from Volantis. Moqorro does. And Benero does. And a lot of these, and all these, pretty much all the other people we see in Volantis do, and even people who aren't R'hllor worshippers, because it's just face tattoos are for all slaves to designate their job. So if we can assume that they sort of fit into the way Volantis works, let's imagine that to fit in Volantis, they decided, yeah, we're going to go full bore on slavery. And so all our people are slaves. But in Braavos or Mir or Pentos, maybe it's fits that government style just like it lines up so well in Volantis. Maybe it doesn't happen to fit in Volantis so well. Maybe it just, they made it fit over time. And it's had a long time to get that way.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That's a good angle. Maybe it's not so much that Braavos has to find a way to manage the Temple of R'hllor, even though they have slaves. Maybe it's that Volantis has to find a way, the R'hllor and Volantis has to find a way to fit in, even though they have slavery here.
Yeah.
I guess we'll call us our guys slaves. Yeah.
Yeah, because like for all we know, like their default is somewhere in the middle of hardcore slavery and freedom, right? Again, where a lot of what we know is through this lens of Volantis, because Melisandre, we know a lot about it from Melisandre, but she's isolated. We haven't seen her in her natural element. We didn't see her before she came to Essos, other than her vague dreams of being sold at an auction, which is slavery auction. You know, that makes sense. She was sold to a Red Temple, so it probably does work that way in Ashai, since she's not associated with the Red Temple in Volantis, and she was a slave as a child. That's at least one other Red Temple that uses slaves. Would probably. So I kind of leaning towards they fit in with whatever city they're in. They kind of have to obey the laws of that city. They find a way to make that work. Maybe it just happens to fit really well at Volantis. Maybe they didn't have to change much. Maybe they did, though. Maybe they had to change more than we think.
Maybe being branded as a slave of R'hllor and Volantis protects you from being branded as a slave to someone or something else.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, consider, is it slavery to what's happening with the Faceless Men? Like, Arya, they say she can leave. But it's still indoctrination, and they're requiring her to give all of herself up, like her identity. Like, she can't even be Arya anymore. You know, it's very like shaving your head, and it's very much like real world brainwashing. You cut your hair off to make you subconsciously feel like you've returned to an infant state. Do that full like washing of like cleansing, and it's supposed to like trigger these nascent feelings of when you were a baby and make you kind of reset. It makes brainwashing and suggestion more take more easily. And they do that to soldiers when you first brought in. They strip you down. Prisoners, same thing. Like anyone that you're about to just enter a whole new world. This is a very common thing, to strip away everything you were before, all little physical remnants of what you were. And yeah, and speaking of the Faceless Men, they're more extreme than a lot of the stuff that happens in Red Temples, right? Like, they're not as populous. They're not nearly as widespread. But, I mean, the many-faced god, this death stuff, it's pretty hardcore. I mean, it's probably more hardcore than R'hllor stuff, which is also pretty damn hardcore. But at least the R'hllor stuff has, like, an answer. It's like there's a great evil coming, and we got to stop it. And they kind of seem right about that. Many-faced God is like, yep, we're all gonna die. Like,
there's many assassination contracts coming, and we got to cash in on them.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of different possible loopholes on how Braavos can work, how these other cities can work. We don't want to get too bogged down on this, but I do want to point out a few other details that we know. Thoros, like we said, was given to the Red Temple at Mir. He was the youngest of 6, and he was a big dude. Aryo-Hotah was sold to the Bearded Priest. That's not Red Temple. That's the Bearded Priest of Norvos, but it's another religious order, and they have slavery in Norvos. Norvos is very, very rigid, very authoritarian. So it definitely suggests that if Thoros was given to the Red Temple, not sold, and his family was poor, so if they could sell him, they probably would have, right? And they just gave him. And Aryo-Hotah, same thing. His family couldn't afford him. He was a big 8th child, and they were like, we can't afford to feed this kid. Yeah, they had 8 kids. Thoros was the 6th of 6th, and Aryo was 8 of 8. And they were both huge boys and ate a lot. So their families were like, we can't afford your mouth. So, but even though it's just one line, tells us a lot. Thoros wasn't sold, he was given, and Mir has slavery. Although they have less slavery because of Braavos enforcing their will. As we know, Braavos gets the upper hand on some of the other free cities because they're so powerful, and is like, stop that. Stop slaving so much. Illyrio says that to Tyrion, like, we have slaves, but only on the down low, because Braavos is telling us not to, and they're really nearby and they're more powerful than us. So anyway, here's a great point from Christina K. As we move into our final section, or second to last section, we have parallels and supernatural, and then we have a little bit of outlook here. Indeed, this episode is turning into a big one, as we thought it would. That's
So we're not going to get to the Starks, I guess.
We still haven't gotten to War and Peace yet. So Christina K says, the description of Mel using her magic is very, very similar to the description of Nissa being murdered. Ooh, check it out. Mel says, quote, the fire was inside her, an agony, an ecstasy. And then Saldar San says, while telling Davos about Azor Ahai, it is said that her cry of anguish and ecstasy left a crack across the face of the moon. Christina says, I've always thought that it was strange that she consented to the stabbing, and furthermore that she seemed to enjoy it somehow. But that seems to be something that happens with R'hlloric magic. So I've kind of wondered since then if maybe the whole story is a description of some kind of red priest ceremony, meaning Nissa is undergoing some sort of transformation, maybe kind of like what Melisandre or Makora and or Bonero went through to become closer through supernatural means to have this longer lifespan. Melisandre's glamored. We don't know if Makoro's not glamored. Apparently, he maybe could use one because he's so frightening looking. But
or at its core, this is fire magic that she experienced. Whether one way or another, that's how the fire magic feels.
So and if you think about other things like these sort of contrast of feeling agony and ecstasy, pain plus pleasure. You think about Dany drinking the Undying One's drink, and Bran drinking the weirwood paste. They have these sort of similar sort of energy. What's that?
Shade of the evening.
Shade of the evening, yeah. The way both of those experiences are both similar to each other, but they have a lot of opposites: sour than bitter, or sweet than bitter. Love than hate. All these like contrasting emotions: fire and ice. The biggest of all, at least in terms of this series.
You think Victarion felt any ecstasy in his hand?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Man, and that's the one moment where it cuts away from his perspective.
Yes,
it's that really queer moment where it leaves his perspective.
Does he scream in anguish and ecstasy, or just anguish, just agony?
We do know the sailors on the outside hear screaming and laughter, and it freaks them out. It's kind of like Dany outside of the tent when Miri Mazdoor's in there, and there's laughing and singing and a wolf thing and a fire guy involved in fire and all these other weird things happening, and it's super creepy. George is so good at the horror elements.
You think Nissa was actually killed?
Maybe not. I don't know. It's hard. It's a really interesting story. Like just first of all, he tries to cool the blade in water, then in a lion, which that symbolism right there. It's like a lion, a lion's heart. Like which lion are we talking about? Is that Cersei? Is this Jaime? Is this the whole House Lannister? Is it Tyrion? I don't know what the deal with that is. And then a woman of fire who, with this agony and ecstasy, is she willingly doing this? Is she a reason she would willingly do it is because she is like a red priest, devout, and sincerely believes that this is necessary to save the world, and is thus sacrificing herself in order to do it. Or the story is not telling us the truth, and she was like, "Don't stab me! I don't want to do this."
Like, and he's like, "Oh, that kind of tickles. That feels a little good. Ow, ow." Yeah.
Or a reason she did it is because it didn't kill her. It enhanced her. It maybe whether she did it for that reason or it turned out to be the case. I'm just wondering if it's a possibility that stab, like Lady Stoneheart got her throat slit, but she's still alive and arguably more powerful and maybe not happy, I guess. But
I mean, it's
anyway, just saying.
No,
possible Nissa wasn't actually killed.
If we have beings of pure ice, why not beings of part fire? I mean, dragons are beings of fire, sort of, but like she's transformed by fire. In that scene where has her chapter, she's like, it's like a reverie. She's feeling the transformation. It's like it's an ongoing thing where she's slowly becoming more and more one with fire. And you wonder concepts like fire white and fire night and fire this and that. I think Christina might be onto something here with this transform. It's more of a transformative thing rather than just a pure straight sacrifice to give power to a sword. Because that always seems a little weird, right? Like a metaphor for sacrificing yourself to imbue a sword with magical energy, like that's got to be a metaphor. You know, like, God, I mean, it could be, just her soul went into the sword. Like that just seems
sword
too.
imbued her with fire energy.
Oh,
fire
yeah,
magic.
the way
The other
around.
way
Yeah, like
around.
That's what I'm supposing.
I mean, Valyrian steel is magical, and like maybe you do, and like, and from what we know about it, it does require sacrifice. So that does, at least, it's not totally crazy that Azor Ahai was making some super weapon from an unwilling person or a willing person. Maybe, obviously, a slave wouldn't be willing, but maybe that doesn't matter in terms of the magic. It doesn't matter whether the person is willing or not. Just has to be a sacrifice, and then you get your blade. One idea that I know we've said before is that Dawn, which is, other than its coloring, has all the properties of Valyrian steel. Its lightness, its sharpness. Maybe that's a willing sacrifice. When it's a willing sacrifice, it comes out all pure and noble. But when it's a forced sacrifice, it's dark and red and flamed and smoky and
Very
chaotic.
few are willing, so that, yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know, we're getting pretty guessworky when we get out to that, but there's definitely stuff there. It's definitely like it's not a big stretch. It's just maybe a little stretch.
And there's no way George doesn't want us to guess what was going on there with Victarion in his hand.
Yeah.
When he doesn't show the one time in a whole series. He's like,
right? We've got multiple examples of people like becoming one with fire or having already been one with fire in Melisandre's case, or like this one with Victarion is like the most incredible example. And I think, as we've talked about before recently, it may be the fact that Moqorro can do that is perhaps more important than the fact that Victarion has that part of him now. Maybe more people. Who else will he do that to? What else? Will it continue to move up his arm? Will he continue to transform?
ooh.
Will like it
Yeah,
creep
that's a
far?
good question.
Next time
Yeah,
we got to keep an
grayscale?
eye. Next time we see him, where is it? Is it all the way up here? Is it still at his elbow? You know?
Will it fade away?
Well, okay, that too. Yeah. That wouldn't be as fun, but it could be. It could happen.
It's gonna like burn out and crumble to ash.
Yeah, just ash arm. Victari ash.
It might make Victarion dependent on Morocco.
Oh.
Like, hey, do it again. It's going away. You know,
Yeah, recharge me,
keep
bro.
you around. Yeah.
Need a new battery. Okay, but I'm gonna have to sacrifice someone else. That wouldn't stop Victarion. He's like, yeah, fine, go for it. Yeah, who? Name them. Like, your pick. So let's do some comparisons. We've talked about how much this fire element stuff is so important. Let's take a look. This fits in with our overlap of magic theory, our overarching magical energy theory. So compare all these things to ice, and as we do this, the mindless worshippers, the zealots compared to the undead, resurrection and raising the dead, fire whites, fire whites versus ice whites, eternal life. Bonero preaches that all those who follow Daenerys will live forever, endless summer versus endless winter, human sacrifice on both sides of it. Old gods versus R'hllor. Nope, these are more opposites, like rather than parallels, but just complete opposites. Like no priests versus lots of priests. According to the old gods, there's no boss other. We've never heard of the Night King as a TV show invention. We've never, that version of the Night King anyway. But according to R'hllor, there is a great other. According to Melisandre and Bonero, is that the same other that is behind what's going on in the north?
It's another other.
It's another other. So who's right about that? Is there a great other, or is there not? Is there some boss energy? Is there some magical force that enables it all? Like, is there some the heart of winter? If that's destroyed, will that wipe out all the others? Like, maybe that's what she perceives as an energy source that she's perceiving as a god. And
Maybe it's just a mediocre other.
Mediocre other. Shadows are the domain of R'hllor versus shadows are the domain of the others. I mean, they're called white shadows, right? They're patch face. The shadows come to dance, my lord. The shadows come to play, my lord. Which one's he talking? Is he talking about Melisandre? Is he talking about the others? Which is it? Both? What about phrases like nothing burns like the cold,
What if there's just a big miscommunication, misinterpretation? It's really the gray otter.
The gray otter. I want to meet the gray otter. I want to feed him. What kind of play does the great otter engage in? So
Shakespeare.
Returning to the topic of waxing and waning of magic, going over to Thoros talking about resurrections. Thoros was surprised that the last kiss worked on Beric. He had done it, he said, dozens of times before, and was like, what the? It worked?
Thoros is like, I just keep kissing dead people and blood came back to life.
I finally got my kiss right. Like the kiss that can wake the dead. Hey, ladies. I've got a kiss that can wake the new. Anyway.
And that did seem to be how they presented it with Melisandre and Jon in the show, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's
She's
true.
like, I don't know what to do. Like, I guess I'll try this. Oh, it worked, you know.
And remember, Melisandre in the show, she sees the resurrection. She's aware of the resurrection. She's like, that shouldn't be possible. She finds out about Beric. She doesn't know about Beric in the books. So I don't think she knows about resurrection at all yet in the show, in the books. No, I don't think she does. I mean, unless it's in her mind that we haven't addressed. She hasn't.
Yeah, a question in the books is whether she'll find out through someone that it's possible, whether she'll stumble on it just by trying something like, separately, or whether it won't be, that at all that brings him back to life. Because, there are other theories, although they're kind of less relevant now that the show did what they did. It's kind of blew the other theories out of the water a little bit.
Yeah. So it's unclear, since Thoros is really the only one that we get a clear picture of before the rise in magic that happens around the time the comet comes and the dragons are born. Melisandre comes after that, right? Like, she's the prologue of the beginning of the next book. We don't know whether her powers were weaker before, and we don't know, even though fire and ice are in opposition, we kind of see them work together sometimes, but not always. Like, for example, Thoros' power. Thoros starts reading the flames as well. But his powers don't work at the Ghost of High Heart's Grove. Even though the werewoods have been cut down, there's still enough, lingering magic. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. He tries. He's like, yeah, it doesn't work here. When we leave, I'll go do my visions there, and then I'll get some clarity. But I can't do it here. And also, Melisandre can't get inside Storm's End for her shadow baby unless Davos rows her under the wall. So she's kind of past that barrier. It's unclear if Makoro or Benera, if their powers have increased since the dragons were born in the comet, because we only see them much later from that. And it gives additional context to when Melisandre burns the grove at Storm's End. She's doing it kind of maybe as a religious symbolism thing, but it may also have been a way for her to break that old god's magic. She may those two may be connected. She may, like, if I burn this tree down, yes, I'm also making a religious statement, but I'm also maybe removing some anti-magic that's affecting my own skills here. Here's one that a lot of people may have missed in the Forsaken chapter. I know you haven't read this one, Sean, or maybe you have. There's Aeron sees one of his visions. He sees the Iron Throne with Euron sitting on it with a Cthulhu head. He's got a tentacled kraken face, and all the gods are impaled on the spikes of the Iron Throne. It's creepy and awesome. And one of the gods is the Lord of Light. We don't get a description, though. He just says he sees the Lord of Light impaled. I'm like, well, what does that look like?
How does he know it's the Lord of Light?
I know. Like, what is it? What is that? Come on.
Yeah,
man.
like, does he see a figure
yeah,
on
just
there?
Like a bunch
or,
of light,
the figure, the heart, the fiery heart impaled, like just the symbol? Or is it like, like when it's a dream and like, you're like, I saw you, Aziz, but like, how do you know it was me? Like, I don't know. It wasn't really you, but like, I knew in my brain, like, it was you, even though like I couldn't describe what you look like.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. I kind of figure that maybe, like, if pressed, he might not have a description. He was like, I don't know. I just knew it was the Lord of Light. Kind of thing.
Yeah. So, on Dany, again, just we've mentioned this briefly before, but when she's looking at the tent that Mary Mazduri is doing her thing, and she sees a man wreathed in flame, one theory is that is R'hllor, because R'hllor is a big part of her future. Nina suggests maybe that's Rickard Stark, because, Dany's father burned Rickard Stark. There's also a wolf in that scene, so the fact that wolves are part of the story and part of her future, both of those fit as ideas. I can't really say one idea is better than the other. So it's pretty cool, though. Either one I like, so worth pointing to. All right, our final section. Let's talk about a few things that are to come. We'll discuss some outlook. We obviously aren't going to do a deep dive on each Red Priest right now, given how long this episode's been already. But just a quick rundown. Melisandre, Makoro, Thoros, and Benero are the only named ones we've seen. Of course, there's the Stoneheart is a being imbued by R'hllor at this point, but she's not a priest, obviously. We saw a fat red priest at Dany's wedding, like I said, a drunk one that Arya sees, and Sam sees one at a brothel, also in Bravos. So this is a sign of how the Red Temple functions in Bravos. We get a few clues from that, seeing one in a brothel, seeing one in a bar. That's like, okay, so this is not Benero, Makoro, Melisandre. These are different red priests. These are not, notice none of them
Thoros ilk.
Yeah, none of these are leading night fires or leading worshipers or praying, like staying up all night yelling and preaching. This is very different. Yeah, so,
earlier you supposed that maybe in Bravos they only send the most devout. Maybe they send the least devout. Just send them to Bravos.
Yeah, send them to Bravos.
The wannabes, the half-hearted.
We're not making much inroads over there anyway, Addition by subtraction, send this guy over there, yeah. But we know the Triarchs are aware. So the Triarchs in Volantis, we know they're aware that things are becoming a problem. They can see where the wind is blowing. The population of R'hllor worshippers is massively outnumbers their own population. It's like 3/4 of the people in Volantis are slaves, and most of them worship R'hllor. And they're really worried about what's going to happen with the slave industry being under assault by Dany, with her being the symbol of revolution, with a lot of slaves probably wanting to join her. They're on a tightrope walk. They're like, well, how do we fight her when so many of our soldiers are slaves that see her as their savior? That's not going to work, is it? They don't fully grasp the peril they're in, but they are trying to take steps. And here's an example from Jorah and Tyrion's conversation with the widow on the waterfront. Here's what she says.
Triarch Malakwo tried to hire the Golden Company, did you know? He meant to clean out the Red Temple and put Benero to the sword. He dare not use tiger cloaks. Half of them worship the Lord of Light as well. Oh, these are dire days in old Volantis, even for wrinkled old widows. But not half so dire as in Meereen, I think.
Yeah, Meereen is true. They're suffering the wrath of Dany right now, and plague, and it's true. There's a lot worse going on in Meereen.
But Dany's coming. Don't worry about that widow.
Yeah, don't worry. Dany's coming, and she's on your side. You're gonna help her when she arrives. I'm pretty sure. She's got a soft spot and loyalty for that side of things. She's no old blood of Volantis.
I mean, she might not help her. She might just burn her on accident. I mean,
True.
Like, I honestly,
True.
like, she's coming to Volantis with fire and blood, and I don't think, I think a lot of slaves are going to die because of Dany.
Yeah,
I do.
You're right. You'll note that the widow says Triarch Malakwo tried to hire the Golden Company. So why did they refuse? Because they were like, this is a terrible idea. We're not going to go attack the priests of the Red Temple and get on their bad side, or because they were just busy with Aegon already. There are things happening and they don't have time for these other contracts. It could be 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But yeah, the Tiger Cloaks are the military of Volantis. These are also slave soldiers, so half of them worship the Lord of Light. Maybe they're not all slave soldiers. Maybe some of the commanders aren't. But again, it's the same problem. Like if the commanders all are ordering the subordinates to attack the god they worship, that the subordinates worship, that's not going to go well. Who are they really going to go? Are they going to obey their earthly master, or the one who's promising them salvation and afterlife and all that? It's a pretty easy choice if you're devout. So, what else will they try? Will they try to take out Benero some other time, some other way? Will they try to make some other maneuver? Will it even matter? Because Dany will get there first. But the Widow of the Waterfront also points out that R'hllor has more worshippers in Volantis than all other gods combined. Watch out. And Benero straight up preaches that if Volantis goes to war against Dany, then Volantis will surely burn. Which, yes, we agree. And Tyrion agrees too. His reasoning is more earthly. He's like, yeah, go against, obviously Dany. We as well agree that Volantis is screwed.
I agree that I thought that already, and then we had that experience. Maybe I don't know if you were going to bring it up, Disease, but
yeah, I'll say it.
At the con.
So I've said this before, but it's the time to bring this back. Me and Ashea were hanging out with Michael Clarfeld and a bunch of our friends at Worldcon in Dublin several years ago, and we were each getting a map signed by George. I had one of these, this known world map, to get signed. I bring it up to George. He's like, "Oh, this is nice. He loves these maps," and he's like, soon this will all be on fire. And I was like, whoa, spoiler.
Really? It's gonna burn.
I was like,
huh?
all of it, you know.
Interesting.
But probably Volantis and Marine are top 1 and 2. Take your pick, which is 1 and which is 2. The most screwed.
Yeah.
King's Landing perhaps is on that list as well. Some pretty screwed cities. Yeah. Old Town, maybe. I don't know. Plague is coming. Different reasons they'll be screwed. There's a lot of cities that are screwed. Pentos is probably going to have some trouble too.
Did Dany have a vow to keep back in Karth? Didn't she swear to burn some people down there? Was that alleviated when they let her in?
I don't know that it's Karth she has the problem with. Certainly that one Call the one who she encountered right at the end of the Call Joko and Call Mago or in Ko Mago. But I don't think she wasn't happy with the Karthine, but they didn't they just kind of
I might be misremembering, but didn't she, when she was like at the doors, requesting entrance, and at first they're like, no, and she's like, I'm going to come back and burn this whole city to the ground. But then eventually Zara was like, I'll cut my hand here. I'll bring her in. It's cool. But then, so maybe that alleviated. But am I misremembering? Didn't she kind of like make a promise that didn't really feel like a threat to them at the time?
I think that was maybe part of just the back and forth. I don't think it was something she settled on. But yeah, maybe we'll have to look that up and get more clarity. So in addition to there being just one God, there's this idea that there's only one prophet, which is an interesting point for us who consider that who've taken note of the evidence for multiple Azor Ahais. Can there really only be one prophet based on what we know? That said, it's what they believe that matters as much as what we think is true. They're going to act on what they think is true, not what is real, right? So here's the quote when Tyrion realizes this: not just one God, but one prophet.
I just want to think about, I think you mean one Messiah? I think a prophet is a little different.
Well, this is, yeah, you're right. Yeah, Messiah, you're right. Yeah, that might be a better word to use, yeah.
Savior or whatever.
Savior's probably a better word, yeah.
The hairs on the back of Tyrion's neck began to prickle. Prince Aegon will find no friend here. The Red Priest spoke of an ancient prophecy that foretold the coming of a hero to deliver the world from darkness. One hero, not two. Daenerys has dragons. Aegon does not. The dwarf did not need to be a prophet himself to foresee how Bonero and his followers might react to a second Targaryen.
Yeah, maybe they're the ones who burn King's Landing. And Dany, that could still be Dany, could still get blamed for that because they're following her. She's the one that they're following, even though she doesn't give the order. She doesn't tell them at all to do that. They see the second Targaryen. They're like, this guy is interfering with our savior, our leader figure. Dany wouldn't have to say anything. They could just go and burn that person in that city to the ground. And she takes the blame for it because they're following her. She's like, I didn't want them to do that. I didn't tell them. I told them not to do that. And they just did it. Yeah. So... now, as I said, leading into that quote, we're not sold that Azor Ahai is a singular figure. But again, the followers of R'hllor aren't going to listen to us. They'll act on what they believe. Melisandre thinks it's one, and here's a quote from Melisandre.
Yet now she could not even seem to find her king. I pray for a glimpse of Azor Ahai, and R'hllor shows me only snow.
Snow with a capital S. Only snow.
Clearly, that's Ramsay.
Yeah, clearly Ramsay is Azor Ahai. Yes. So, if Dany is Azor Ahai according to Bonero, and she does check off the boxes better than anyone, but Jon checks off a lot of the boxes too. And here we have this line where she sees only snow. I mean, in capital S. Like, what the heck is that all about? It seems pretty straight. I mean, there's definitely some wiggle room. But with that capital S just does so much work.
Even without the capital S, I still think, whoa, really? Only snow, huh? But put the capital on it, that's not a...
Yeah, that is subtle in that you could miss it, but it's not subtle in that when you see it, it's really hard to interpret as flakes falling from the sky. That's a person.
The capital S makes it so you cannot miss it or mistake it or misinterpret it. It's clear what it's supposed to mean there.
Yeah. So
Ramsay,
yes. Ramsay.
Super clear.
Yeah. So that's a pretty big deal. So we wonder like how that's going to play out if Melisandre will ever figure some of these things out. But really, honestly, each of these red priests deserves their own episode. Melisandre, we could have a whole episode on her. We could have a whole episode on Makora. We could have an episode on Thoros. It would be really good. Let's run through a few other things that are happening or could happen that maybe will get expanded on in the story. Things that are just starting. Like Melisandre marries Alice Karstark and Sigorn of Fen. That's an ice and fire marriage, too. We've got a lady of the north and a free folk from the far, far north. Like the Thens. Remember, some of the Thens had never seen the wall. That's how far north they live. They're like, whoa, we've only heard about this thing. Thoros invokes R'hllor for trial by combat, right? They have that for Sandor versus Beric. That's under the eye of R'hllor. That's not a 7 thing, right? Marriages, other things. Well, we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more like R'hllor being the god invoked for ceremonies that have gods invoked. Marriages, trials, battles, things like that. In Qohor, small note, we hear that in Qohor, the followers of the Red Priests have rioted and tried to burn down the Black Goat. They don't like the Black Goat. The Black Goat's among the most demonic of other gods.
Yeah, definitely. Like if you're gonna think of something that's more like the Great Other, it's the Black Goat.
But the point here is that they're no longer getting along. They had sort of coexisted with other religions, even though they're a monotheistic, dualistic religion and don't accept other religions. They had kind of gotten along, but current times, things are starting to fall apart. That's that unity, that barrier that kept them from fighting, that whatever peace was being maintained is falling apart. And these little one-liners are showing us that. It does a lot. You know, that one line telling us of... Sean, you're a big proponent of the one line of dialogue doing so much work. This is an example of that.
Yes.
We'll probably never go to Qohor directly, but it's a really cool place. It's got Valyrian magic. It's probably the place where Valyrian magic is the most still alive. It's the place where Valyrian steel is the closest to being rediscovered. It's the place where they can remake it, but not make new versions of it. So yeah, there's a lot there.
I wonder which one line in A Song of Ice and Fire does the most heavy lifting, the most work, you know?
The single greatest.
Yeah, like
line.
I don't know, the greatest is, you know, maybe being putting too much emotion on it.
That's
but,
different standard.
Different standard. Greatest is different to like heavy lifting, doing the work, you know? Like an example might be like, promise me Ned. Those are 3 words that say a lot. They give you a lot right there. You don't need to know anything else to know there's something else there. If you're just saying, promise me, Ned, you're not saying what to anyways, that'd be something that's food for thought for later. But,
the reader lives 1,000 lives. I like that one. That's a good one. That's more meta.
Yeah, I think that's more meta. I don't
less
know,
about the series and more about just the experience of...
Yeah.
Still does a lot of work, but you're right. It's hard to top and promise me Ned.
Like which like it's kind
that one maybe is a good.
It's kind of, I think of like that thing where it's like do like a Twitter like short story where people will do like a drabble kind of thing where you basically like a short story in as few words as possible. That kind of thing.
Yeah. What's another one that comes?
Yeah, the one
you
like
know nothing, Jon Snow. That's a good one.
like the most famous example of that of the sad story is for sale baby shoes never worn. You know that one. You know that one's like an iconic example of that where you know it's so little but it says a lot. That baby had big feet.
Yeah, the one
I
think. The one you said, Aziz might be like a greatest line contender, but isn't necessarily doing as much heavy lifting, like Ashea is saying.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, the worse the fervor gets, the more violent it could get. The more the followers of R'hllor think their version of the apocalypse is coming, the more evidence for that, the more desperate things get, the more disease and war and darkness spread, the more they're going to see this as evidence of the end times and act on it. Consider what Stannis' R'hllor worshippers have been up to. They're pretty scummy. You got guys, they're lighting the night fires, and that's not a problem, but lighting the people, that's a problem. Burning people. More and more burnings of people. Even Asha was queasy by the burning of humans, and she's Ironborn. She's seen some of the worst of people. Shireen, you know, people want to... That's coming. Somehow, some way. Theon is probably not going to get burned, but Stannis' followers want him to burn Theon, and, you know, it could happen. I don't think it will, but maybe some Freys survive the Battle of Ice, and no one's going to stand up for them not getting burned. If Stannis is like, let's burn a few of these Freys, people are going to be like, well, all right, yeah, they were our enemies. Maybe I'd rather you just cut their heads off, but... Okay.
Walder Frey probably would be okay with it. Yeah, we got too many.
It's like, they're failures. If my sons who fail, do what you will with them. I only keep the winners. I like people who don't get captured.
The twinners, you mean?
What's that?
The twinners.
The twinners, yes. He's only for twinning. Like, what happens to the murderers of Jon? Like, what if the Night's Watch loses after assassinating Jon, and like the people who on his side come out ahead, Melisandre and those people come out ahead? Are they going to burn Bowen Marsh? Are they going to burn, Wick Whittlestick, the people who stabbed Jon? Like, I could see that happen. Maybe to bring Jon back. That could be the way, even like that could be part of it. Like, we'll just be seeing more of that, I think. All right, a couple of questions here. Natasha F says, that was in the show, the thing you were referring to, Sean, Dany swearing to burn Karth. No wonder I wasn't so clear on that because it was show only. No wonder. Book Nerd says, did the Valyrians tattoo their slaves? Could that be one of the reasons why the Faceless Men began changing their faces in the first place? Oh, that's a cool idea, that secondary one. I've never thought about that.
Yeah, if they had to cover their tattoos.
We don't know if the Valyrians tattooed their slaves. It would make a lot of sense. It would make sense that Volantis wasn't the origin of that idea. On the other hand, we don't know of tattooing in other free cities that were ruled by Valyria for a long time. So maybe it's a Volantene thing only. We don't know, but I think there's a strong chance it was, because it happened in the real world too. Tattooing slaves was a very common thing in the real world. It's just kind of an obvious idea, like a permanent way to mark somebody. One thing we learned about siege tactics. That was one way to pass messages in and out of a siege, would be to shave a slave's head, tattoo a message on it, and then let their hair grow back. And then send them inside with instructions. Say, hey, shave my head and you'll get the message. You can also do that on an animal. Well, you don't have to do a human with it. You can shave like the side of a cow, tattoo something, let the fur grow back. Then it's just, it was a way to pass messages. It's like, whoa, that is clever. It's also gross, but... ingenuity aspect of it's pretty clever. Phil H says, the eagle tattoo on the thrall's chest, burning after blowing the horn, flame from within, is interesting connection to it too. Oh, yeah. Great call. That is another example of like burning body that's like magical in Orient.
Yeah, when blowing the horn, did they feel agony and ecstasy or just agony?
Yeah, that guy died, we found out, or we're told. We don't actually see the body. Euron is a dishonest guy, but I tend to believe him on that one. He said his lungs were filled with ash, which that's kind of a fire transformation thing. Maybe not the full version, the bad version. Like, you're not transformed, you just die. But yeah, that's a great call out, Phil H. Matthew says, the idea of a super weapon reminds me of nuclear power. Dragons in Westeros being compared to nuclear power made me think that maybe Azor Ahai didn't make a sword. He hatched a dragon like Daenerys. It was part of the legend of the Nissana story is the really loud cracking sound, right? Which Dany's eggs made a really loud cracking sound during the hatching at the end of Game of Thrones. So there is that element connecting them along with some other ideas. So
I mean, they talk about like the crack across the moon or whatever, and the idea of dragons coming from the moon.
Yep, that's right. It is set up. That's pretty cool. Terra Incognita says, maybe the flame vision shows the nearest potential Azor Ahai reborn.
As in, like, why Melisandre might see Jon and Benero might see Dany. You see what's closest to you. And I like that idea a lot, that if there isn't just one, that you would see through proximity. Because I really don't like the idea of it being just Jon or just Dany, personally. I'm like pretty against that.
I am too. It just doesn't seem to work, like, because
it doesn't work
they both
to
fit
me.
it so well.
I don't know. It just doesn't.
I fully acknowledge Dany fits it better. But Jon fits it pretty well.
Yeah. So I like the idea of it. Yeah, they being that they both have the potential to be Azor Ahai and could both be Azor Ahai together.
Jon could check off more boxes later. Like maybe he'll do some other things that align with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that if Melisandre was in Essos near Dany, that she might start seeing Dany in her visions just because they're like close.
It's definitely a big if. Like what happens when Moqorro introduces all this stuff to Dany, and then when Dany meets Melisandre, assuming that happens, which I would guess it will. And Moqorro and Melisandre, will they get along? Will they argue? Will they have dogmatic arguments like, no, R'hllor says this, no, R'hllor says this? Yeah, who knows?
Even if it is just John or just Dany, it's still not enough it isn't just them that's going to do it.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just Azor Ahai. It also, he needed Nissa, for example. You know what I mean? So
Tyrion, Arya, Sansa, like people who are going to be doing
the original
organizing.
Tale, Yentar and Nefarian and Eldrick Shadow Chaser. We think, to be clear, and I'll speak for Aziz here as well, because we think it's possible that they're the same figure, but we don't lean towards them being the same figure. We think they were multiple figures, in part of the history.
Yeah.
Like Eldrick Shadow Chaser is a different person from Yentar. But maybe Eldrick Shadow Chaser is the same person as Hirkun the Hero, or maybe some of them are the same figure and not all of, in terms of that. But just like that, we see Arya and Tyrion and Bran and all of them are essential to.
Yeah, it would be weird if they were all off or on for the same reason. The information was like, all of them are this. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I don't think all of them are. I think some of them, I don't think all of them are. And I don't think that, I think they're going to make sense to me that there would be some crossover in figures that, that totally. Hirkun could be Azor Ahai or something.
Okay. The trivia question. Let's give our answer. You said you knew the answer to this one, Sean. Okay, so.
Well, what is it, Sean?
Who else is called Pink Priest? Or who calls someone else Pink Priest? Bonus if you can say who it was.
Victorian calls Moqorro a Pink Priest.
Correct. Yes,
Yay!
That's right.
Good
Yes,
for you,
Victorian
Sean.
does have that sense of humor as well. It's neat. What is that supposed to mean? Like they're watered down? Well, he literally was watered down. He floated in the sea for 10 days.
Yeah, he was looking at his robes because Moqorro claimed to have been in the water for 14 days, and Victorian's like, no one could have lived in the water for that long.
Yeah.
And I think he says something like, what are you, some kind of magician? He's like, no, I'm a red priest. And he looks at him and realizes, his robes might have been red at one point.
Yeah.
And he says, more like a pink priest.
Yeah. I remember Victorian does this. He's like, I thought that giving him a Greyjoy robe would make people accept him more. And it had the opposite effect. It was like, are you kidding me? It's like a 7 foot tall, super wide, the width of 3 people, pitch black face as if he's been burned with flame tattoos, and you give him a black golden kraken cowl to make him look friendlier. Didn't work. Yeah, I was like, it's like, that didn't work. I don't get it. I get it. So yeah, that's that. So yes, the answer was Victorian and Moqorro. So I highly recommend our Ashai episode. Even though we had so much to say today, there isn't that much overlap. It's just a huge topic. We get more into the details of the prophecy, more into the details of Ashai itself, which we didn't really touch on so much here. A little more about magic, a little more about certain characters, a little more into the magical side of things. This was more about this episode, I think we focused more on characters, outlook for masses of people, outlook for the whole societies of Westeros, and what they're going to perceive. So the Ashai episode is more focused on things from the other angle, more from the inside of the story. So next week, we're going to talk about Before the Dragons. That is the state of Westeros during the generation just before the conquest. So right before Aegon's conquest, the 10 to 15, 20 years before that, what was it like before Aegon set about uniting it all? That topic, like all of our topics over the last few months, was chosen by our loyal and lovely patrons. Patreon.com/History of Westeros if you would like to join in. You can also sign up to subscribe and get our bonus episodes via Spotify. You can just add on $5 a month to your monthly bill. Fire and forget sort of situation. And just leave it be. Get all our bonus episodes, which we're constantly adding more to. We're uploading them about one a week. So do that if you're so inclined. If you need more History of Westeros, we got you covered.
And if you live in the San Diego area, send us an email. We'll be there July 20th to 24th.
That's right. And, of course, you can also send a one-time donation through our website. We'll send you our bonus episodes manually that way if you prefer. So we want to try to give you as many ways as possible to support the show, to keep it going, and to continue to have as much fun as possible, approximately once a week, sometimes a little more often. We got House of the Dragon coming pretty soon, so we're going to be having even more fun when that happens. Thanks to everyone who came live and watched today. Thanks to everyone who downloads and listens later. We appreciate if you want to leave a rating or a review, whether it's on iTunes or Spotify or wherever. Hit the like button on YouTube.
If it's positive.
Yeah.
I appreciate it if you leave a positive review. If you leave a negative review, I don't appreciate that so much, I gotta say.
I find it weird that someone would listen to the entire episode here, where it was more than 3 hours, and be like, I'm giving them a 1-star review. Like, why did you listen to this whole thing if you weren't enjoying it? Like, there's a lot of other podcasts.
People are weird out there.
They are. Sometimes you can upset somebody with one comment, can throw the whole thing off. I would like to think we're not that controversial, but the world is.
Well, there was some controversy in the chat today. Sean's background. Someone asked, what poster does Sean have in the background? He's got that's Moonlight and Contact, right?
Oh yeah, Contact. Yeah, I saw that one in theaters.
Yeah.
makes me
Yeah,
old. Thanks to Nina for
now he's got
her.
a cat on
Yeah, we
screen
got a kitty
as well.
Thanks to Nina for her assistance, for great notes. Check out Good Queen
Yay,
Alley. That's
kitty.
one L in alley.tumblr.com. Thank you very much to all our patrons and other supporters.
And Makora.
There's Cora.
Yeah.
Makora today.
Named after Makoro because of her flames across her
Yeah,
face.
she's
That's
got
cool.
The
Perfect.
face tattoo.
She's got a
How nice
night
she
fire to
goes.
tend to, though, so
Yeah.
she's got to move on. Thanks to Joey, Jesse, Kevin, and Michael for our music and video intro and all the excellent stuff that makes our show better. Thanks to our mods on Discord and Facebook for helping manage everything, keeping the discussions clean and friendly and thorough. Our friends over at Here Be Dragons, well, we went a little beyond our normal starts. They're already starting today. They're covering Kenobi, which just finished, so that's a lot of fun stuff to talk about. Let's real quick set up
Just a little preview for y'all.
a preview for y'all. We're going to be announcing this
next week, probably.
But if you're trying to get your plans set or curious what our plans are going to be, our House of the Dragon schedule going forward will be Monday at 6 Eastern, Saturday at 3. So basically our Sunday time is going to be Saturday time instead. Same time, 24 hours earlier.
Yeah. And so on Monday, we'll have Sean to talk about the episode. And then on Saturday, we'll have a guest, usually, to talk about the episode coming up in full spoilery discussion to, just for all of us who know what's going to happen, we can talk about that and do a little preview of the upcoming episode.
So we'll have Monday at 6 with Sean, spoiler light to no spoilers, and then Saturday at 3 with rotating guests with spoilers and looks ahead. And we'll also have additional content, scripted content between that. But those are the two. That's the live stream schedule.
Yeah. So just so you know, so if you're wanting to schedule your work or your work schedule and you get to plan in advance, it's helpful for you to know to be off at Monday at 6.
Yep. Well, our longest episode in a while is now complete. We'll see you next time for more Valar Rereadis.